All right. Good morning and welcome to the October 2011 meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce our agenda for this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. Today's agenda includes 2 items for your consideration and 1 presentation. First, you will hear an order on reconsideration of the 2007 Enhanced Disclosure Report, an order and a further notice of proposed rulemaking proposing to replace television broadcast stations' public files with online public files to be hosted by the Commission. Second, you will consider a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking to comprehensively reform and modernize the universal service and intercarrier compensation systems to ensure that all Americans have access to robust, affordable broadband and mobile services. Last on your agenda, you will hear a presentation on the status of preparations for the nationwide test of the Emergency Alert System to be held on November 9th, 2011 at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is your agenda for today. The first item will be presented by the Media Bureau. William Lake, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Media Bureau presents an item that begins the process of modernizing the way television broadcasters inform the public about how they are serving their communities. This proposal follows up on key recommendations in the Information Needs of Communities report. One of a television broadcaster's fundamental public interest obligations is to air programming responsive to the needs and interests of its community of license. Broadcasters are afforded flexibility in how they meet that obligation, but they must maintain a public inspection file, which gives the public access to information about the station's operations and enables members of the public to engage in an active dialogue with broadcast licensees about broadcast service. Today's item strives to make information about broadcast service more accessible to the public by taking advantage of current technology, thereby facilitating interactions between broadcast stations and the communities they serve, while at the same time reducing compliance burdens on broadcasters. Joining me at the table this morning are Robert Ratcliffe and Sarah Whitesell of the Media Bureau's front office, and Mary Beth Murphy, John Norton, and Holly Sorer of the Bureau's Policy Division. Holly will present the item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, good morning. I am very pleased to present this order on reconsideration and further notice of proposed rulemaking in the Commission's enhanced disclosure proceeding. In 2007, the Commission adopted a report and order in this proceeding that required television broadcasters to make their public inspection files available on their websites if they had one, and replace their issues programs list with a standardized form that required quarterly reporting of all programming in numerous programming categories. The feedback we received from broadcasters and public interest advocates, as well as intervening advances in technology, have persuaded us to re-examine the balance that we struck in 2007 between public access to station information and the burdens that providing such access can impose upon broadcasters. As such, in this item, we vacate the 2007 report and order and dismiss the pending petitions for reconsideration of that order. We do remain committed to the principle of providing disclosure of broadcast station service to their communities of license as reflected in their public files. We believe that aligning broadcasters' disclosure obligations with the capabilities that 21st century technology provides will do just that. Therefore, in today's further notice of proposed rulemaking, we seek comment on a new proposal. We now seek to replace the requirement of a public file at each television station with a requirement that stations submit the relevant documents to the FCC for inclusion in an online public file to be hosted on the Commission's website. By hosting the public file, the Commission will lessen burdens on broadcasters, in part because we will be able to import documents that stations already file here, without requiring further actions by licensees. These documents will account for about a third of the items that are required to be placed in the file. The further notice proposes a few modifications of the existing public file requirements. For example, largely for privacy reasons, the item proposes to exempt letters and emails from the public from the online posting requirement. These items would instead be kept at the station in a correspondence file. The further notice also proposes to require the online posting of sponsorship identifications that are currently only disclosed over the air, as well as shared service agreements, which currently need not be disclosed. The further notice discusses the Commission's intent to make the online public file available in a standardized and database-compatible format, further improving the usefulness of this data. It tentatively concludes that while we develop that capability, that stations should post documents in their existing formats. We wish to provide the public with improved access to the public file as soon as possible while we continue to work towards developing a more sophisticated database. Today's further notice is limited to online disclosure and applies only to the television service. In a separate proceeding, we will revisit the standardized form that was originally adopted in 2007. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt this order on reconsideration and further notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's proceed to comments from the bench. Commissioner Copps.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Bill, Holly, and all the team. One of the FCC-centric recommendations emanating from the Wallman report on the information needs of communities is to, quote, emphasize online disclosure as a pillar of FCC media policy, end quote. So it is fitting that we have a disclosure item before us today. The history of this proceeding goes back many, many years, but I will refrain from visiting the full saga this morning, riveting though it is. To make a long story very short, the FCC in 1981 ended its requirement for broadcasters to keep a program log and to ascertain what were the programming and issues interests of their communities of service. The decision was premised upon a straightforward, if narrow-minded, cost-benefit analysis. Those were some of the nadir years for public interest premises at the Commission, and that's putting it mildly. Rather, in an effort to deregulate at any cost, those commissions made it ever more difficult for citizens not only to seek redress for poor station performance, but even to unearth the facts about what broadcasters were in fact doing. Concerned citizens had to go to a lot more trouble just to see a station's file, and even when they got to it, avenues of redress were closed off because so many of the public interest responsibilities of the stations had been eliminated by the FCC. I believe it is the responsibility of this Commission to move forward on both these fronts. One, to provide for fuller and more adequate disclosure, and two, to breathe life and meaning back into public interest responsibilities and guidelines. I've been pushing for action on both these fronts since I arrived here 10 years ago, and purely as an aside, there is still plenty of oxygen in my lungs that I will dedicate to breathing life into these critical issues going forward. Many others have spoken up in favor of fuller disclosure and strengthened Commission oversight. These include the public interest community, President Clinton and Vice President Gore's advisory committee, members of Congress, concerned broadcasters, and millions of citizens across the land. We are not trying to bring back yesterday, but to forge reasonable 21st century expectations for 21st century broadcasting. As Lyndon Johnson put it more eloquently, yesterday is not ours to recover, but tomorrow is ours to win or lose. So I hope that we can start down the road now of winning that tomorrow, late in the day though it is. The further notice we are embarking upon holds promise. It proposes that television broadcasters move their public files online to a site hosted by the FCC, which I hope will be searchable and aggregative and therefore offer real opportunity for comparative analysis and wide public understanding. Without that kind of searchability, online disclosure would be small improvement over having the file kept in the broadcast station's basement. What we are moving online is in large measure the same information available in the current station files. We urgently need to consider expanding the range of required reporting. Too often the files are spare to the point of uselessness. And indeed, a notice of inquiry currently on circulation tees up such issues. I hope that we complete this proceeding expeditiously so we can move on to common sense rules responsive to the information needs of communities. There were some valid points made by broadcasters in regards to Form 355, and I have often remarked since on the desirability of making some alterations to the form and then getting on with the job. I had hoped that would be a far less time-consuming process than the one we have actually endured over the last few years. Yes, I said years. Instead, we are for the most part starting over. The substantive action we take today is to vacate the previous report and order instead of looking for ways to revise our earlier work and expedite its completion. The report and order being vacated has been held in limbo, and I do hope we move beyond the NOI stage with dispatch, given that this is a problem of the highest public interest priority. We just do not have more years to consider this, and I believe other commission vehicles would have allowed us to travel a quicker route. Disclosure is sunlight, and an important means to important ends. But I repeat what I said at the time of the release of the Wallman report. Disclosure is a means to an end and not an end in itself. Making information accessible to the public, prerequisite that it is, serves the public interest only if there are consequences when the files disclose station shortfalls. So we have to ask ourselves what the public is able to do with the disclosed information. Bring a complaint? Based on what? Have a hearing designated? Have a more serious license renewal? It was interesting to me that in the conversation that resulted from Form 355, some broadcasters expressed their willingness to provide the information, but only if it would be anonymous, and with assurances that their licenses would not be affected. While many broadcasters work hard to serve the public, it would appear that there are some who need to read the public interest bargain one more time. If disclosure brings to light behaviors that require redress, I am for having redress on the books. I happily acknowledge the additional requirement to include pay-for-play and shared services and information that the broadcasters need to put online. While I would be even more pleased if we made a decision that shared services are an end run around our media ownership rules, I do believe this information will nevertheless be revealing. Lastly, I note that we propose moving the station's existing political files online. This too will be revealing, but not as revealing as it could be. I believe citizens are entitled to more information about the political ads that bombard them at election time, and nowadays it seems almost all the time. The Supreme Court articulated in its Citizens United decision that transparency is a vital counterbalance to the perceived influence of corporations in the campaign process. Opaque and misleading information is not what democracy thrives on. We are not well served when those who are attempting to manipulate our political dialogue and determine election outcomes can disguise themselves and hide behind misleading names. If a group calling itself Citizens for Purple Mountain Majesties is in reality the mouthpiece of a special interest that is refusing to clean up a toxic dump or is pouring pollution into the Great Lakes, don't citizens have a right? And yes, I said a right to know that. Open government can only exist where people and groups trying to determine elections stand up and tell us who they are. That's not happening enough. The fissures in our democracy will continue to widen if anonymous money retains its unchecked influence in our elections. So I would hope the Commission would find its way to using the authority it has to require fuller sponsorship identification of the interests bankrolling so many of the ads we all watch all the time. When the roll is called, I will vote to approve and move ahead with this item. Hopeful that my colleagues will work with dispatch to advance wider disclosure proceedings in the months ahead. I thank the Bureau for bringing up this item, and I especially want to recognize the hard work that our public interest community did to emphasize both the importance and the urgency of public disclosure in behalf of the public interest. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Copps. Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I enthusiastically vote in support of vacating the 2007 order that required television broadcasters to post their public inspection files on the internet and adopted the so-called enhanced disclosure form to replace the quarterly issues programs list. In 2007, I cast the sole dissent against the imposition of this form. At the time, I cautioned that our action was treading towards reinstating an ascertainment regime discarded by the Commission in the early 1980s. Such action risked infringing upon the First Amendment rights of broadcasters, among other things. Moreover, this form was burdensome, excessively regulatory, and to quote the FCC's Information Needs of Communities report, overly complex. It is not surprising that the form was challenged before the Commission, the courts, and even the Office of Management and Budget, where the information collection was questioned under the Paperwork Reduction Act. Although our action today concludes this regulatory chapter, it appears to be only temporary, as this order contains a further notice of proposed rulemaking that could result in additional burdens on television broadcasters. Furthermore, recently placed on circulation here at the Commission is a notice of inquiry that initiates a separate proceeding to create a replacement standardized form and reporting requirements. But more about that another day. In the further notice, the Commission asks additional questions about placing the public file online. As was the case in 2007, I remain supportive of making the public inspection file more accessible and more useful, thus improving communications between broadcasters and their local communities. Here, the Commission tentatively concludes that the public inspection file should be centrally located on the FCC website. Hopefully, this proposal would reduce costs and burdens on broadcasters, a concern that was voiced by many, by placing the onus of creating and hosting the website on the Commission. But I will be attentive to a record that indicates otherwise. We also asked for comment about the proposal that the political file should be posted online and that updates should be made immediately, absent unusual circumstances. Previously, the Commission decided to exempt the political file from the online requirement, concluding that, quote, the burden of placing this material on the Internet outweighs the benefits, end quote. Now, the Commission asserts that most political advertising transactions are electronic, so online availability may be less burdensome than previously thought. I look forward to hearing from stakeholders regarding the possible ramifications of an online political file. Although the majority of the questions in the further notice are meant to elicit comment on moving the public file online, others serve as a means to expand the required disclosures made by broadcasters. I have significant concerns about the substance of some of those questions and the possible direction in which the Commission could be headed. We propose that broadcasters upload a list of all on-air sponsorship identification announcements and seek comment regarding whether sharing agreements, including those not currently required to be reported under our rules, should be included in the online public file. Such sweeping requirements may overly burden the broadcaster without sufficient corresponding benefits to the local citizens served by the station. Further, I wonder whether history is doomed to repeat itself. Are we once again heading down a path towards needlessly burdensome rules, regulatory overreach, Paperwork Reduction Act challenges, and unconstitutional intrusions? Stay tuned. Despite the serious reservations I may have, it is important to develop a full record and allow public comment prior to forming conclusions and implementing any regulations. In this vein, I would like to thank the Chairman for seeking specific comment on the costs and benefits of the proposals contained in the further notice. I hope that participants will provide us with the information and data needed to balance the public interest in ready access to information with the costs and legalities of such disclosure. As always, I will keep an open mind and look forward to learning more from all interested parties. For these reasons, I support this order and further notice, but concur on the questions of expanding the scope of the materials required to be contained in the public inspection file. Many thanks to the Media Bureau and the legions of folks who have worked on this particular item. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. Disclosure and transparency, words that inspire confidence, increase the public's trust, and convey good faith. We're seeing, hearing, and focusing more and more each day on ways to enhance these efforts in both our public and private sector engagement. So it greatly pleases me today to join my colleagues in taking a meaningful step to this end when it comes to the media landscape. Local television stations play a vital role in American lives. They provide us with daily updates on weather and traffic patterns, conduct in-depth reports about area officials and businesses, and expose us to rare views and personalities in our neighborhoods when we're often too busy to notice. While I wasn't personally involved in local TV reporting, the small newspaper that I owned and operated offered unique insights and reporting that had value worthy of protection. Under current obligations that apply to commercial broadcast television stations, the program logs and files of any particular station can be accessed and inspected by the public. Those files serve to assist not only media academics and scholars who assess the trends in local reporting and programming, but they also act as a verifiable means to hold stations accountable for their public interest obligations. If a broadcaster asserts that a certain show is educational and informational or informative and relevant to the community, these files serve as a means for others to evaluate that contention. Further, when a broadcast license comes up for renewal, community residents can examine the public file to determine if objections should be raised based on what they may conclude are the lack of cogent and frequent local reporting and community-based content. A community's desire to examine public files is only possible, however, if they have realistic, meaningful access. I have personally seen such files. They reside deep within a broadcaster station's inner labyrinth, far from the reception area, in a rather vintage filing cabinet with letters marked only in small font. I make light of this to stress an important point. Now is the time for us to move these public files out of those cabinets and onto the web. The public should have unfettered access to documents and records that affect them intimately, and I believe that local news does just that. Today, 74% of Americans turn to broadcast TV more frequently than any other source for news and information, while 78% of Americans are online on a regular or semi-regular basis. That statistical overlap is striking. Physically going into a station and sifting through mounds and mounds of documents is time-consuming, travel-intensive, and difficult. Creating a meaningful way for the public to view these files with an online engagement is, to quote a popular commercial, priceless. Despite these benefits, I am cognizant of the burdens that come with transitioning to a web-based filing system. To quote Steve Waldman's report on the information needs of communities, a transition to a digital system needs to be handled carefully and in a manner sensitive to the capacities of different broadcasters. Our item, therefore, asks probing and constructive questions in that regard, and I look forward to input and suggestions as we move toward full implementation. In a separate but related proceeding, we will address the amount of programming content that should be contained in the online disclosure process. I certainly would like to see as much detail as possible. As I mentioned, I've seen the paper versions of these public files, and they leave much to be desired. And while I am an advocate for a streamlined process, submitting a flimsy description for an important story is neither okay nor should be permitted. Thus, the submissions should have to meet a certain threshold, and I am certain that broadcasters will be partners with me and my colleagues in that regard. I've spoken to the chairman, and I appreciate his assurances that we will move expeditiously on both the consideration and enactment of that item and the next steps for this one. The Commission, I know, is committed to devoting the necessary resources toward the construction of a host forum for these files and will get this up and running in a timely manner. With the inclusion of documents found in the FCC's Consolidated Database System, the diligence of the able people behind our agency's website operations, and the related item concerning future forms layout and content, I am confident that we will develop a mechanism for a robust and thorough process. And no matter what shape or form this offering takes, it must be accessible to those with sight and hearing impairments. We have made significant progress under the Communications and Video Accessibility Act, and this is another way where our agency can continue to lead by example. I wish to thank all of the hardworking individuals behind this item, particularly Ms. Holly over there. And I look forward to the next iteration of this extremely important proceeding.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. On my first day as chairman, I said the FCC should and would use technology to improve the overall operations of the FCC, running efficiently and communicating effectively with the American people and all stakeholders. Moving from paper to digital and from offline to online is central to that commitment, and we have been doing that consistently. Some examples. We've revised our rules for the filing of all tariffs electronically, decreasing burdens on carriers and on the Commission. We now permit staff to notify parties electronically about docket filings instead of mailing copies. And we've expanded the use of electronic notifications of fees owed. We've harnessed modern technology to open our workshops and hearings and communications to people online on multiple digital platforms. Moving processes and information online is important for several reasons. It drives additional broadband use. It empowers apps developers and consumers to use public data in innovative ways. And it drives processes and efficiencies that reduce costs for both the private sector and for the government. Look at e-government. Our government spends hundreds of millions of dollars each year on paper communications with citizens, with most of those interactions with communities that are also low broadband adopters. By moving more services from paper to the internet in smart and creative ways, showing citizens the value of internet access, we can both incentivize broadband adoption and make government more efficient, ultimately generating significant savings that we can reinvest in knocking down barriers to adoption. Today, we're applying the common sense principles of moving information online to rules relating to television broadcasters. Broadcasters have long been required to disclose certain information as part of their public interest obligations. This information is commonly known as the public inspection file. Right now, this information is disclosed in paper form, and the public inspection file is a filing cabinet in the stations themselves. In today's broadband world, that just doesn't make any sense. With this item, we propose to move the public file from paper to the internet, to host this information at the Commission so there's efficient public access and reduced costs. All of these important steps in the Commission's efforts to ensure effective public access to information. Making this information easily accessible will let the public see the large number of broadcasters that are doing a strong job of meeting their public interest obligations, and also those that are not. This disclosure proposal that we act on today was a significant recommendation of the FCC report we issued recently on the information needs of communities in the digital age. This proposal has already drawn support from leaders of broadcasting and public interest communities who are often at odds, but agree that there should be a streamlined and non-burdensome online mechanism for broadcasters to disclose key information about their service to their communities. I'm pleased that we're able to take action on this recommendation of the Information Needs of Communities report, and we intend to act on another recommendation, the Enhanced Disclosure NOI, in the very near future. I look forward to hearing from all stakeholders on our NPRM, and of course additional ideas about how to continue to integrate digital technology into the way we work here at the FCC. I thank the Media Bureau, Bill Lake, Holly Sauer, all of you for your work on this item, and also the Managing Director's Office for its work on this issue as well. With that, let's proceed to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approve in part, concur in part.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, so ordered. And the request for editorial privileges is granted. Madam Secretary, please announce our next item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented jointly by the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Wireless Bureau. It is entitled Connect America Fund, a National Broadband Plan for Our Future.
Sharon, take your time. No rest for the weary. Whenever you're ready, and thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Wireline Competition and Wireless Telecommunications Bureaus are very pleased to present fundamental reforms to the Commission's Universal Service Fund, or USF, and the Intercarrier Compensation System, or ICC. When the National Broadband Plan was released, you issued a joint statement saying that USF and ICC should be comprehensively reformed to increase accountability and efficiency, encourage targeted investment in broadband infrastructure, and emphasize the importance of broadband to the future of these programs. Today, we present you with a report and order accomplishing exactly that. Today's order recognizes that USF and ICC have complemented each other in supporting the availability of phone service in rural America. The order holistically reforms both programs to eliminate waste and inefficiency, target support to where it's needed, and transition support from voice-only networks to broadband connections capable of supporting voice as well as other applications. The order would establish a Connect America Fund, or CAF, for supporting voice and broadband communications in rural, insular, and high-cost areas of the country. For the first time, such support would be allocated according to a budget set at $4.5 billion annually based on the existing level of high-cost universal service support. Once the transition to the CAF is complete, up to $2 billion would be available for areas served by rate of return carriers and up to $1.8 billion for areas served by price cap carriers. $500 million would be dedicated to ensuring ongoing support for mobile voice and broadband coverage in areas the private sector is unlikely to reach, including up to $100 million for tribal areas, and at least $100 million would be dedicated to a new remote areas fund, as described in an accompanying further notice of proposed rulemaking. A reform of this magnitude could only be accomplished through collaboration and teamwork. We've required 2 slides to acknowledge the many dedicated legal drafters, financial analysts, economists, engineers, and others who contributed their expertise to this roughly 500-page item. The leadership team for this effort included, and many of these folks are seated behind me, Randy Clark, Brant Gillen, Patrick Halley, Trent Harcrater, Kevin King, Al Lewis, Ruth Milkman, Jenny Prime, Eric Ralph, Michael Steffen, and Mark Wigfield. In addition to those joining me at the table today, Rick Kaplan, Chief of the Wireless Bureau, along with his Senior Deputy Bureau Chief, Jim Schlichting, and Auctions Division Chief, Margie Wiener. Wireline Bureau Deputy Chief, Carol Maddie, Associate Chief, Rebecca Goodhart, Chief Data Officer, Steve Rosenberg, USF and Pricing Deputy Division Chiefs, Amy Bender and Marcus Mayer, and Attorney Advisor, Victoria Goldberg. Amy and Margie will present the wireline and wireless portions of the CAF, respectively, while Victoria will present the ICC reforms. Amy?
Today's order establishes rigorous public interest obligations for all elements of the CAF, including broadband, performance, and build-out requirements. We maintain a strong partnership with state commissions, who will continue to play an important role through state carrier of last resort obligations and by designating ETCs, meaning carriers eligible to receive support. CAF recipients will also be required to submit annual reports to the FCC and state commissions to ensure effective oversight and accountability. In price cap territories, the CAF will provide support for broadband in 2 phases. In CAF Phase 1, all existing price cap legacy high-cost support will be frozen and over time subject to obligations to advance our broadband goals. An additional $300 million in CAF funding will be made available to price cap carriers that will commit to expediently deploy broadband to a specified number of unserved locations in their service area. For Phase 2 of the CAF in price cap territories, the order establishes a framework that would provide support in the first instance based on a forward-looking cost model and directs the Wireline Bureau to undertake a public process to develop the specific model. in each state and territory, incumbent price cap carriers will be asked to undertake a state-level commitment to serve the high-cost locations in their service territories in that state with voice and broadband, excluding areas where there is an unsubsidized competitor, extremely high-cost areas, and low-cost locations that can be served without support. Carriers accepting the state-level commitment will be obligated to meet robust, scalable broadband service requirements. In areas where the incumbent declines the state-level commitment, a competitive bidding mechanism will be used to distribute support. The further notice proposes a structure and operational details for the competitive bidding mechanism, in which any broadband provider that has been designated as an ETC may participate. For rate of return carriers, the order reforms the rules to support continued broadband investment while increasing accountability and incentives for efficient use of public resources. The reforms recognize the unique nature of small rate of return carriers and allow them the predictability of remaining on the current system in the near term. The further notice seeks comment on establishing a long-term, broadband-focused CAF mechanism for rate of return carriers and on adjusting the interstate rate of return from its current level of 11.25%. As a transition to the new support mechanisms for mobile broadband service, the order eliminates the identical support rule that determines the amount of support for mainly mobile competitive ETCs today and phases down existing support over a 5-year period. Margie will provide further details on the mobility portion of the item. Margie?
The report and order before you explicitly recognizes the role and value of mobility as a universal service goal and implements measures to ensure universal availability of mobile voice and broadband where Americans live, work, and travel. For the first time, today's item provides dedicated funding for mobile voice and broadband service through Phase 1 and Phase 2 of a newly created mobility fund. Phase 1 provides $300 million in one-time support and an additional $50 million dedicated to tribal areas to expand the deployment of mobile voice and broadband in areas where such service is lacking. Phase 2 provides $500 million annually for ongoing support to extend and maintain the availability of mobile voice and broadband, including up to $100 million for tribal areas. Phase 1 of the Mobility Fund will provide one-time support to enable swift deployment of networks for mobile voice and broadband services in areas unserved by current generation mobile networks, or 3G. This support will be awarded by reverse auction, generally to not more than one provider per area, in contrast to the current system of CETC support. The auction will maximize coverage of unserved road miles within the budget, reflecting the value of mobile voice and broadband coverage. Auction winners will be required to deploy 4G service within 3 years or 3G service within 2 years. To ensure that important public interest objectives are met, Mobility Fund recipients will be subject to a variety of obligations, including voice and data roaming and co-location requirements. In addition, the order establishes a separate and complementary one-time Tribal Mobility Fund in Phase 1 to award $50 million in additional universal service funding for tribal lands, including Alaska and Hawaiian homelands. The order provides several mechanisms to help ensure that Mobility Fund support addresses tribes' needs for service on their tribal lands. Phase 2 of the Mobility Fund will provide $500 million per year in ongoing support. As part of this budget, Phase 2 of the Mobility Fund will include dedicated ongoing support for tribal areas of up to $100 million per year. The funds available in Phase 2 will expand and sustain mobile voice and broadband service in places where service would be unavailable absent federal support. The further notice of proposed rulemaking proposes a structure and operational details for Phase 2 of the Mobility Fund, including a distribution methodology, eligible geographic areas and providers, and public interest obligations. Finally, the order dedicates at least $100 million in annual support to provide voice and broadband to the fewer than 1% of Americans living in remote areas where the cost of providing traditional terrestrial services is extremely high. In the further notice, we seek comment on how to award this support as part of a dedicated Remote Areas Fund. Victoria Goldberg will now discuss ICC. Victoria?
ICC is a regulated federal-state system of payments between carriers for delivering phone calls. The system, created in the 1980s, reflects geography-based permanent charges and implicit subsidies that are fundamentally in tension with and a deterrent to deployment of modern networks. The system is eroding rapidly as demand for traditional wireline telephone service falls, and consumers increasingly opt for a panoply of other communications services, including wireless, VoIP, texting, and email. This order comprehensively reforms the ICC system to help bring substantial benefits to consumers, including reduced rates for both telephone and broadband services. The reforms also improve the fairness and efficiency of subsidies flowing to rural areas and unleash innovation by setting the stage for transforming legacy telephone networks into the broadband networks of the future. The order first tackles regulatory arbitrage by adopting rules addressing access stimulation and phantom traffic, combating service provider schemes that exploit loopholes in our rules that cost consumers millions of dollars annually. The order next tackles reform of the current ICC system more generally and adopts a bill and keep methodology as the end state for all ICC traffic. This new methodology provides a unified national framework, with states leveraging their localized expertise to help implement this framework and oversee the transition of intrastate access rates from the status quo. This transition involves capping all interstate and most intrastate rates as of the effective date of this order, and establishing a transition path for the reduction of most terminating switched access rate elements and some transport rate elements. The order also adopts a transitional recovery mechanism to mitigate the effective revenues reduced by these reforms, while providing greater certainty and predictability going forward. Protections are adopted to ensure any increases in residential or business rates are minimal and capped. Where necessary, some carriers will also be eligible to receive CAF support, subject to requirements to use the funds to advance our goals for universal service and broadband. The order addresses the treatment of VoIP PSTN traffic, clarifying that traffic that is exchanged over PSTN facilities that originates and/or terminates in IP format is subject to transitional ICC, and makes clear that all carriers originating and terminating VoIP calls will be on equal footing in their ability to obtain compensation for this traffic. Certain aspects of CMRS LEC compensation are also addressed to resolve existing ambiguity and address disputes. The order promotes the deployment and use of IP networks, and the accompanying further notice seeks comment on the policy framework for IP to IP interconnection. The order also makes clear that even while the further notice is pending, we expect all carriers to negotiate in good faith in response to requests for IP to IP interconnection for the exchange of voice traffic. The Bureaus recommend adoption of this item and request editorial privileges. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I don't know where to begin to thank you, but first, let's hear Commissioner Copps, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all. A lot of folks bet we couldn't get here today. They said universal service was too complicated and intercarrier compensation too convoluted ever to permit comprehensive reform. Universal service was sadly out of step with the times. Intercarrier comp was broken beyond repair. Yet here we are this morning, making telecommunications history with comprehensive reform of both universal service and intercarrier compensation. So the first thing I want to do is congratulate Chairman Janikowski for the leadership he brought to bear in getting us to a place where no previous chairman has managed to go. Today, thanks to his leadership, we build a framework to support the 21st century communications infrastructure that our consumers, our citizens, and our country so urgently need. So mighty praise is due the chairman and even those who may take exception to parts of what we approve today. Will join me in thanking him for his commitment, his courage, and his Herculean effort to make this happen. In the face of the complex systems we modernize today, it is all too easy to forget the simple, timeless goal behind our policies. All of us benefit when more of us are connected. The principle of universal service is the lifeblood of the Communications Act, a clarion call and a legislative mandate to bring affordable and comparable communications services to all Americans, no matter who they are, where they live, or the particular circumstances of their individual lives. So it is altogether fitting as we move away from support designed primarily for voice to support for broadband that we bear witness to the accomplishments USF has made over the years to connect America with plain old telephone service. The fund has achieved truly laudable success. Thanks to both high-cost support and low-income assistance, we now have voice penetration rates in excess of 95%. No other infrastructure build-out in our history has done so much to bind the nation together. Additionally, it has enabled millions of jobs and brought new opportunities to just about every aspect of our lives. Some stark challenges remain, of course, particularly in native areas. The shocking statistic in Indian country is a telephone penetration rate that at last report hovers in the high 60th percentile. Getting voice service and broadband to Indian country and other native areas is a central challenge to implementing the reforms we launched today. Bringing universal service into the 21st century is the only way we can extend the full range of advanced communication services to places where those services will not otherwise go. The big news here, of course, is that universal service is finally going broadband. This is something I have advocated for a long, long time. It is something a decade and more overdue, and a step that the Joint Board on Universal Service strongly backs. These new tools of advanced communications and technology services are essential to prosperity and well-being for our country. They are the essential tools of this generation, like the hoe and the plow, the shovel and the saw were to our forebears. No matter if we live in a city or hamlet, whether we work in a factory or on a farm, whether we are affluent or economically disadvantaged, whether we are fully able or living with a disability, every citizen has a need for and a right to advanced communication services. Access denied is opportunity denied. That applies to us as individuals and as a nation. America cannot afford access denied unless we want to consign ourselves and our children to growing, not shrinking, digital divides. We are already skating around the wrong side of the global digital divide in many ways, when we should have learned by now that the rest of the world is not going to wait for America to catch up. But here's the good news. If we seize the power of this technology and build it out to every corner of the country and make it truly accessible to every American, there's no telling what we can accomplish. America would be back at the front of the pack. The current system, for all the good it accomplished, has outlived its time. It has strayed from what Congress intended and consumers deserve. Inefficiencies and waste crept in where efficiency and ongoing oversight should have been standard operating procedure. As problems arose, they were too often minimized or allowed to compound. At best, we settled for Band-Aids that never managed to staunch the hemorrhage. Sometimes we didn't even try Band-Aids. And the Commission more than once made things worse by calling communications technologies and services things that they were not, engaging in linguistic exegesis with a fury that even the most intense biblical scholars of old were incapable of achieving. In sum, we lost sight of the original purposes of both the Telecommunications Act of 1996 in general and the Universal Service Fund in particular. Whatever the causes, and we could debate them for hours, our current USF and intercarrier compensation regimes are broken. Legacy access rates encourage carriers to maintain yesterday's technology instead of reaping the benefits of today's IP-based networks. The hidden manipulations of intercarrier payments cost consumers billions of dollars each year. We reimburse some carriers for whatsoever they choose to invest in certain parts of their networks, regardless of whether a lesser amount was all that was needed to provide service to their customers. In some areas of the country, we subsidize 4 or more wireless carriers based on the cost of a wireline network. All of this is reflected in inflated monthly rates that consumers pay. The old saying is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But this is broken, and we are left with no real option short of a major fix. No tinkering around the edges is capable of putting these systems back on a solid footing. Some will claim we attempt too much today, but we would not have to overhaul these programs so fundamentally had the Commission been attentive to its duty to address these problems as they arose and worsened over the years. It's not that we didn't see the writing on the wall. Many people did. Years ago, as just one example, I proposed putting universal service funds to work supporting broadband build-out like other countries were doing. 4 years ago, 4 of my colleagues here were ready to vote to put USF on a new broadband footing, including a pilot program for competitive auctions. On intercarrier compensation, we 4 were ready to vote at the same time for lowered rates and an end to traffic pumping and phantom traffic. Commissioner McDowell will remember this well because we worked very closely on it. What we are doing today is repairing 2 broken systems and putting in place a more credible and efficient framework that will benefit consumers, carriers, and the country. We are approving a framework for allocating limited resources to mitigate serious communication shortfalls. It is a framework that should give all stakeholders a clearer picture of how these systems will work going forward, and that will provide predictability for ratepayers, businesses, and policymakers. I would have preferred a higher budget for the fund, a budget that I believe consumers would accept because of its importance to putting this nation back to work and providing our kids with the tools they need for their futures. That being said, we set down a good and welcome road here with steps that will make a huge difference, and that is why I'm able to approve the item, though it is not, in several respects that would come as a surprise to no one, the precise item that I would have written. Our focus is on support targeting the unserved areas that need it most. There is much to be said for this approach at this time because of the harsh budget realities the nation faces and because of the perceived need to limit universal service. But I hope and expect that our actions today will have spillover effects in underserved areas too, because America will not be broadband sufficient until the underserved become fully served too. Inner cities can be just as handicapped as more remote areas. Here too, access denied is opportunity denied. So I welcome the new approach that takes us from scattergun support of voice based largely on the size of carriers and focuses instead on where private investment for broadband refuses to go. This means targeting money for areas where consumers would not otherwise have service, and I believe this is the first time we can really say that about the fund. Acting on another long-standing recommendation of the Joint Board, we for the first time are creating specific funding mechanism to support mobility. This is an historic accomplishment. Clearly, there are many areas where mobile broadband providers are doing very well in delivering services and profiting handsomely, and where support is not needed. But there are other areas that are strangers to reliable mobile voice coverage and where the market otherwise will not go. The mechanism through which we propose to do this, reverse auctions, is a new tool for the Commission. While we have considerable experience with spectrum auctions, this is in many ways a new species of auction, and we will need to be very careful in how we approach and evaluate it. I hope it will live up to the high expectations parties have for it and truly become an efficient way to expand our limited universal service dollars to reach unserved areas. I expect we will learn a lot from the first such auction and apply those lessons to the future. Let me also say how much I appreciate the item's prohibition on nationwide package bidding in the Mobility Fund. I believe this is an important safeguard against gamesmanship and even further consolidation in the industry, and this can only redound to the benefit of rural consumers and indeed all consumers. I am also pleased that we are adopting another safeguard to encourage stability during the transition to the new regime for mobile support. The course we adopt today has 2 auction phases, with the second installment of mobility support dependent upon further Commission decision-making. Understanding the need for maximum predictability throughout these transitions, we will halt reductions in legacy support if for some unlikely and unanticipated reason the second auction phase did not take place as planned. Given the financial constraints we impose on USF, I also am pleased we were able to grow the Mobility Fund from the initial proposal. I would have supported and I actively encouraged a larger number given the scope of the challenges we face, but the increase can at least be seen as an important down payment on further deployment. I appreciate the Chairman's support for this and particularly commend the leadership of my friend, Commissioner Clyburn. I am also encouraged that we launch a tribal mobility fund specifically to target support for mobile service in tribal areas. The state of broadband in Indian country is a national disgrace, somewhere in the embarrassingly low single digits. Again, getting this right will take more money than is being proposed in today's proceedings, but it also hinges on more than money alone. It hinges also on the Commission taking prompt action on other proceedings and spectrum issues pending before us. And even in addition to all this, there are a host of confidence building and cooperation building challenges confronting us. I do believe the current Commission is on the right path to rebuilding our consultative mechanisms with Native nations. We have new dialogues taking place, new inputs being shared, and new commitments to work together. We're also moving toward a fuller appreciation of what tribal sovereignty means and of the need to accord tribes the fuller and more active role they must have to ensure the best and most appropriate deployment and adoption strategies for their areas and their populations. I feel encouraged that we are at long last positioning ourselves to make progress by working more closely and creatively together. The sad history here, as we all know, is many promises made, many promises broken. We need to turn the page, and I think we are beginning to do that now. I also applaud the strong build-out benchmarks that will be a condition of receiving Mobility Fund dollars, and indeed support from any of our new programs, with meaningful enforcement and clawback consequences if providers do not meet their obligations to consumers. This injects much-needed discipline into the system. It is another really important component of our actions today, and strongly enforced, one that will inspire much more confidence in the new system than we ever had in the old. Today is also historic because we finally take on the challenge of intercarrier compensation. We take meaningful steps to transform what is badly, sadly, broken. This item puts the brakes on the arbitrage and gamesmanship that have plagued ICC for years and have diverted private capital away from real investment in real networks. By some estimates, access stimulation costs nearly $500 million a year, and phantom traffic nearly affects nearly one-fifth of the traffic on carriers' networks. Today we say no more. We adopt rules to address these arbitrage schemes head-on, and very importantly, we chart a course toward a bill and keep methodology that will ultimately rid the system of these perverse incentives entirely. My enthusiasm here is tempered by the fact that end-user charges under the label of access recovery charges are allowed to increase, albeit incrementally, for residential consumers. My first preference was to prevent any increase. Alternatively, we could require individual carriers to demonstrate their need for additional revenues before imposing the ARC. Perhaps some of the largest and most profitable companies should not be able to charge the ARC. However, the Commission does adopt some important measures to protect consumers, even as it allows additional charges. In particular, consumers already paying local phone rates of $30 or more cannot be charged the ARC. The use of this ceiling recognizes that some early adopter states have already tackled intrastate access rates, and their citizens may already be footing a reasonable part of the bill. In the end, I am grateful that, at the very least, additional charges to end users are not as great as they might have been, are spread over a longer period of time, and should be offset and hopefully more than matched by savings and efficiencies realized because of the more rational programs we begin to put in place. And I am hopeful that the Commission will do everything it can to assure that these savings are passed on to consumers. Although I continue to lament the fact that we don't have a more competitive telecommunications environment that would better ensure consumer-friendly outcomes. While the inside the Beltway crowd and the armies of INRI analysts and assorted other savants will be parsing today's items with eyes focused exclusively on which company or industry is up or down as a result of what we do, who gains the most, who gains the least, and all the other issues that will cause forests to be chopped down and vats of ink drained, I hope we can keep the focus on the consumer benefits of what we are doing. I could not support what we do today unless the expected consumer benefits are real enough to justify the effort, and yes, the risks, of so sweeping a plan. Much will depend upon our implementation and enforcement, and I am sure on some mid-course corrections. But I believe there are real and tangible consumer benefits in the framework items before us. More broadband for more people is at the top of the list. As just one example, we anticipate significant new investment with over 7 million previously unserved consumers getting broadband within 6 years. That means more service. It means more jobs. It means more opportunities. Building critical infrastructure, and broadband is our most critical infrastructure challenge, has to be a partnership. The states are important and essential partners as we design and implement new USF and ICC programs. I have been a strong advocate for closer federal-state regulatory partnerships since I arrived here more than 10 years ago. I've had the opportunity to serve on the joint boards with our state colleagues, to be a part of their deliberations, to appreciate the tremendous expertise and dedication they bring to their regulatory responsibilities, and to have learned so much from them. It is just simple, good sense to maximize our working relationships with them. And more even than my personal preference, which is deeply held, this is the mandate of the law. Section 254 of the Act is clear. The states have a critical role in the preservation and advancement of universal service. While I understand the need for predictability in an ICC regime, I am pleased that my colleagues have retained a key role for states, including arbitrating interconnection agreements, monitoring interstate access tariffs during the transition to bill and keep, and helping to implement our Universal Service Fund, as well as, in many cases, their own state Universal Service Funds. State regulators are by definition closer to the needs of their consumers than federal regulators ever can be, and they retain their role as the likely first venue for consumer complaints. Additionally, I've urged the entire team here and all stakeholders to think creatively about how to expand the state role as we implement these new systems. I would hope that carriers would see the benefits of this federal-state cooperation too, but it is unfortunate and highly counterproductive to consumers when some companies exercise their huge lobbying machines to encourage state legislatures to effectively cut state public utility commissions out of telecommunications oversight. This makes everyone's job, except the industry's giants, more difficult, and it harms the nation. On the legal front, some of the calls made in this item are unnecessarily and unfortunately more circuitous than I believe they need to be. We ought to be long past declaring that IP-to-IP interconnection obligations are required under the Act. We had the chance to do this and to declare that VoIP is a telecommunications service back in 2002 and 2005, and our failures to do so have had tangibly perverse consequences. Avoiding action not only harms competition and delays the more efficient build-out of our information infrastructure, and ensures that America will continue to be down the global broadband rankings in a world where that just doesn't cut it for us. We need to lead the world. We need to lead the world not so that we can pin a medal on our chest. We need to lead the world to regain our prosperity and our competitiveness and our capacity to provide jobs and opportunity to every one of our citizens. Broadband adoption is as great or greater a challenge than deployment. I will continue to push for doing more in adoption, but we are limited here by the reality that today's emphasis is on reforming infrastructure deployment in high-cost areas. That said, I worked with my colleagues to include adoption in this proceeding. I am pleased that carriers that receive funding will be expected to connect community anchor institutions that they pass. These entities often are the places where unconnected consumers get their first exposure to broadband and learn how to use it. I am similarly pleased that all universal service programs now include a real and enforceable requirement for affordability. It's only logical and indeed consistent with the mandate of Section 254 that carriers whose networks are funded by federal universal service support should be required to offer service at affordable rates. That said, much of the important adoption items are still ahead of us. We have an imminent opportunity to update our Lifeline and Link-Up programs, and I expect we will be able to accomplish that before the sun sets on the year 2011. So there's still much work to be done. The success of today's framework depends heavily on the Commission getting related and integral policy calls right. We have to revisit our long overdue special access proceeding, something critical to small businesses and anchor institutions. This is a situation with huge spillover effects on the excessive rates consumers are forced to pay. It's a problem that needs to be resolved by report and order in the months ahead because it has simply waited years too long. Similarly, we must act on contributions methodology. The distribution of funds is only part of the broadband challenge. Of equal importance is the contribution of funds going into USF. I would have preferred to see such an item in front of us today. There is inherent inequity in a system that funds the deployment of broadband off of assessments on interstate telephony. Once we ensure that double, triple, and quadruple play services that benefit from universal service bear their fair share, we will not be so subject to the unnecessary financial constraints that our current approach imposes. We also need spectrum management decisions that avoid putting still more spectrum in too few hands. Among other good results, that would drive better mobility auctions. Successful implementation of the steps we present today will demand a degree of stakeholder cooperation that we have not seen in many, many years. Consumers, states, businesses, the FCC, Congress, and the administration each has a vital role to play. But as you have heard me say before, stakeholder partnering is how we managed to build America's infrastructure over the past 2.25 centuries, from those early post roads, bridges, and canals right up through our superhighways and rural electricity. Now is the time to practice that American way one more time. And I believe here the process has started off commendably. Everyone has had an opportunity for input. When we approved the NPRM in February, I remarked that everyone would be asked to give up a little so that the country could gain a lot. That spirit of shared sacrifice has made today's action possible. The process has generally, if not perfectly, worked. Stakeholders stepped up to the plate. Their analyses were important, many of their suggestions creative and helpful. Discussions were held between not only likely players, but some unlikely ones too, and I applaud that process. I have no illusions about what perils may await us, but I do want to suggest how much better off we will all be if our efforts going forward focus on working together to implement these new frameworks and working constructively to make changes where they may be called for, rather than spending precious time that the country doesn't have on litigation or legislative end runs that seek to advantage single private interests at the expense of the greater public good. If the generally cooperative spirit of the past several months serves as our guide going forward, we can avoid those pitfalls. Lots of people made heroic efforts to get us today's historic achievement. I've already mentioned the remarkable leadership of Chairman Janikowski. Our internal team, put together by the chairman, worked mightily and expertly on a whole host of unbelievably complex issues. Zach Katz and the dedicated experts in wireline and wireless bureaus, Cheryl, Sharon, Carol, Rebecca, Ruth, Rick, Jim, everybody on the 2-page list, spent many, many hours answering our questions and discussing our requests, and they were backed up by dozens more of our typically brilliant and dedicated FCC team. My commissioner colleagues spent weeks and months immersed in the tall weeds, taking hundreds of meetings, talking with one another, and developing constructive proposals. And the 8th floor advisors, including Angie Cronenberg and Commissioner Clyburn's staff, Christine Kurth and Commissioner McDowell's, worked long days, nights, and weekends to make this happen. In my own office, Margaret McCarthy and Mark Stone provided not only great analysis, but creative suggestions for getting us to better outcomes. And I should note all my staff felt the weight of this and all performed at the stardom level. It has been a highly professional effort by a world-class agency of which I am proud to be a member. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cobbs. Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The feat of modernizing the high-cost portion of the Universal Service Subsidy Program to support next-generation communications technologies while keeping a lid on spending is truly monumental. Thus, our action today is a vital first step in reforming USF while ensuring that rural consumers benefit from needed advanced services. As I've said several times before, the communications needs of rural America is personal to me. My family has deep roots in rural America. My father spent part of his boyhood during the Great Depression on a ranch on the Tex-Mex border without electricity, running water, or phone service. With that background in mind, I'm committed to carrying out Congress's intent of ensuring the most remote parts of our country are connected. The challenge of solving the seemingly intractable universal service and intercarrier compensation puzzle, however, has cast a long shadow over the FCC for more than a decade. In my nearly 5.5 years here, I have traveled across America to learn more about the practical realities of the program. I've held productive policy roundtable discussions with multiple stakeholders in the least populated state, Wyoming, as well as its neighbor, South Dakota. I have traversed tribal lands and some of the least densely populated areas of our country, including Alaska. I've also learned from consumers in urban and suburban areas who pay rates above costs to subsidize rural consumers. And I know that my colleagues have diligently concluded similar field investigations as well. In trying to encapsulate what the FCC is accomplishing today, I've turned to one of North America's best telecommunications policy minds, none other than the great one, Wayne Gretzky. He said, well, without any of us even realizing it, by implication, he predicted what we would do today when he said, "A good hockey player plays where the puck is. A great hockey player plays where the puck is going to be." Today, the FCC is repurposing the high-cost program to support unserved consumers' use of communications technologies from where they are to where they are going to be, in both a technological and geographical sense. October 27th, 2011 is a date that marks a dramatic departure from nearly a century-old policy of opaquely subsidizing analog, circuit-switched voice communications to using the efficiencies of market-based incentives to support broadband connectivity in those areas where economic realities have stalled market penetration. Under both Republican and Democratic administrations, the high-cost fund has become bloated and inefficient. Today, a Republican and 3 Democrats are taking a giant leap together to fix that. I commend the chairman for his leadership and fortitude throughout this process. I also thank Commissioners Copps and Clyburn for their thoughtfulness, graciousness, and collegiality throughout this entire proceeding. Since I arrived at the Commission in 2006, I've been calling for the FCC to achieve 5 primary goals when focusing on USF reform, the most important of which is to contain the growth of the fund. While our efforts today are not perfect, today we are largely achieving this goal in a town otherwise known for its inability to control spending. While I'm on that subject, some have suggested that we scrap the USF program altogether. Others can have that debate. In the meantime, we are mindful that Congress created this program, and its ultimate survival is a matter only for Congress to determine. We are duty-bound to operate within the statutory constructs handed to us. In the spirit of being fiscally responsible, however, we are mandating that the high-cost portion of the Universal Service Fund live under a definitive budget for the first time in history. Functionally, the budget serves as an annual cap through 2017. Until then, the fund may not rise higher than $4.5 billion per year on average after true-ups without Commission approval. After that time, it is my hope that competitive forces will flourish and the development of new technologies will create additional efficiencies throughout the system. If so, much of the vacuum will have been filled and the need for future subsidies will have declined substantially. Perhaps the day will come when Congress can determine that subsidies are no longer needed. Of course, there's nothing we can do to prevent future commissions from voting to comprehensively alter what we have done and spend more money later. That would be true as a matter of law, whether we called our fiscally prudent action today a definitive budget, cap, beret, or sombrero. If the FCC of tomorrow wants to undo what we have done today, however, good luck with that. You're going to need it. If history is our guide, the alacrity with which the Commission can accomplish comprehensive USF reform is nothing short of glacial. Nonetheless, I hope future commissions will keep their caps on out of respect for fiscal responsibility and the consumers who pay for these subsidies. Also today, we are only addressing the high-cost portion of the distribution side of the Universal Service Fund, as Commissioner Copps pointed out. We are not addressing the entire Universal Service Fund, which currently distributes over $8 billion per year. To put that figure into context, USF is larger than the annual revenues of Major League Baseball. In separate proceedings, we will also reform the other USF spending programs. I cannot stress enough that all of the fiscal efficiencies that we will realize in the wake of today's reforms will be lost if similar discipline is not applied to all universal service programs as well. Moreover, we are only addressing part of the distribution or spending side of the universal service program. In fact, despite all of the exhaustive efforts to get to this point, our work on comprehensive universal service reform is not even half finished. Equally important is the need to reform the contribution methodology, or how we are going to pay for all of this. It is no secret that for years I have been pushing for contribution reform to be carried out at the same time as distribution reform. Obviously, that is not happening today. Therefore, we must act quickly. The contribution factor, a type of tax paid by consumers, has risen each year from approximately 5.5% in 1998 to an estimated 15.3% in the fourth quarter of this year. This trend is simply unacceptable. We must abate this automatic tax increase without further delay. Accordingly, I strongly urge that we work together to complete a proceeding to reform the contribution methodology in the first half of next year. In the meantime, today we are undertaking significant reforms. Although time does not allow me to discuss each one, I'd like to mention a few of my favorites. First, it may surprise some observers the vigor and breadth to which we give life to competitive bidding, a market-based approach to distributing subsidies, also known as reverse auctions. This is more than I could have hoped for in 2008, when a Republican-controlled FCC teetered on the cusp of comprehensive reform before our efforts were scuttled. And I'm delighted that Commissioner Copps and I are here to actually get to this point. Supporting these provisions was likely not easy for some of my colleagues, and I thank them for their spirit of compromise. Secondly, we are eliminating the inefficient identical support rule. The wasteful era of subsidizing multiple competitors in the same place has come to an end. Third, we are finally giving consumers the benefit of more transparency by phasing out hidden subsidies, albeit 15 years after Congress told us to do so in the Telecom Act of 1996. Better late than never, I guess. As the veil is lifted, however, industry and government alike will have to do their best to keep consumers properly educated on what they will see on their phone bills and what it all means. For the vast majority of consumers, rates should decline or stay the same. So I will look with skepticism on any news stories that claim the FCC is raising rates. The simple truth is we are not. Fourthly, we are creating a frugally minded but reasonable waiver process for highly unlikely cases where carriers are definitively experiencing extreme hardship due to our reforms. Did I say that narrowly enough? Were there enough adjectives in that? Fifth, and I'm going to stop at 5, don't worry. In the further notice, we propose means testing to identify qualified recipients in remote areas. Such a screening process could save money and maximize the effectiveness of the fund. As a legal matter, some question whether the Commission has the authority to use universal service funds to support broadband directly. As I've said many times before, I believe the Commission does have broad authority to repurpose support to advanced services as handed to us by the plain language of Section 254. I have a much longer legal argument in my full written statement, but in the observance of times and time in small bladders, I will not go on further. But it should come as no surprise that I cannot support the view that Section 706 provides the Commission with authority to support broadband through universal service funds. As I've said many times before, Section 706 is narrow in scope and does not provide the Commission with specific or general authority to do much of anything. We respectfully agree to disagree on this analysis. Finally, given the breadth and magnitude of today's actions, the effects will not be fully apparent in the near term. Certainly, there will be varied opinions regarding what we have accomplished. That said, universal service reform is an iterative process. We will constantly monitor its implementations and quickly make adjustments if needed. In sum, I would like to thank all the people who have sacrificed countless family dinners, weekends, vacations, birthday and anniversary celebrations, and such over the past many months to make this day possible. I was going to start naming names, but then I realized that might be an impossible task because I will leave people out. I do notice that I think, for the record, I'd like to reflect this is the longest table we've had in front of us in the history of the FCC, to the point where Austin is in the press section over there. And I know you would have added more tables, but then he would have been on the other side of the wall, I guess, controlling the cameras. But I do want to make a special mention of not only everyone who is seated in front of us, but the legions who stand behind each one of you, who have all shed your blood, sweat, toil, and tears to make this endeavor possible today. I think perhaps we should have really held this meeting at FedEx Field, but perhaps it was raining today. But also, I do want to commend the Chairman's Chief Counsel, Zach Katz, for his tireless efforts, patience, and leadership throughout this process. Furthermore, I want to thank Commissioner Kopp's legal advisors and Commissioner Clyburns as well for your collegial efforts throughout this process. And for my office, Christine Kurth deserves a special mention. When I hired her just over 2 years ago from the Senate, I said, "Your main mission is to fix universal service." And she accepted my offer anyway. But she has completed half that mission today, and I want to thank her for it. So many, many thanks to everyone, each and every one of you, and my colleagues. This is a historic day for the FCC. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner McDowell. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. We are taking a momentous step today, moving ever so close to fulfilling the goal Congress set forth for universal service in the 1996 Telecommunications Act, to ensure that all Americans have access to affordable voice and advanced communication services. We would not be here but for the incredibly hard work of the FCC staff, under the direction and leadership of Chairman Janikowski and his office, as well as significant input from Congress, our state partners, industry, and consumer representatives. I believe that we have drawn from many competing sources to form a balanced framework that will promote significant broadband deployment as quickly as possible to those consumers that are currently unserved. The painful truth of the matter is that there are 18 million Americans who have not fully benefited from our current universal service policies, and that is unacceptable. They remain the have-nots of the broadband world, who I am determined will benefit from the most from what our action, this action, is today. As I have considered these reforms, it is the unserved consumers who are first and foremost in my mind. This plan provides for speedy broadband deployment to many of those consumers, and with an injection of capital in 2012 for both fixed and mobile technologies. In addition to these immediate needs, I carefully considered how much those consumers are being asked to shoulder when it comes to the cost of inter-carrier compensation reform, as well as the impact on those consumers who already have service. It also shouldn't surprise anyone that it was similarly important to me that we give service providers and their investors time to adjust to our proposed reforms, because from day one, I made a firm commitment to no flash cuts. A reasonable transitional period will help ensure that providers can navigate these reforms successfully. But for those providers who require additional time to adjust, we have in place a waiver process that is firm, predictable, yet fair. Another benefit of this waiver process is that it provides this commission with a safety net so that we can adjust support as needed in order to avoid inadvertently harming the success we have already achieved through our legacy system. Overall, I believe the chairman's proposal carefully balances these interests and will result in a meaningful difference for many Americans, and I want to commend him and my colleagues for the significant progress that is reflected in this order. Accordingly, I offer my full support for the actions we take today. As you all know, I have a deep connection to rural America. Without comparable modern broad communications services enjoyed by urban counterparts, those citizens will never adequately compete in our global economy. They need and deserve reliable fixed as well as mobile broadband in order to thrive. Without this critical broadband infrastructure, rural Americans would forever be left behind. We are aware that the financial needs to provide advanced services in these areas are significant, and yes, I appreciate the fact that setting a budget for the high-cost program will provide overall certainty and predictability. However, it is equally important that we have the flexibility to adjust as needed within and between these high-cost programs. I want to thank my good friends and colleagues for working with me to ensure that we have not unduly limited our ability to revisit our current estimates of the funding that's needed for the high-cost programs in the future. An underlying theme of today's reforms is shared sacrifice for the common good. After all, we are talking about the people's money. We are accountable to them, and I am confident that the adjustments being made to the legacy USF support and the funding mechanisms being adopted for the new Connect America Fund are sensible. These reforms will put both the USF and ICC regimes on a sounder footing so we may better accomplish our goal and Congress's mandate to serve more Americans with advanced communications networks, no matter where they live, work, or travel in this great nation. For a number of years, the Federal-State Joint Board on Universal Service and its state and federal members have called for this commission to provide for the direct funding of broadband. Early on, they recognized the importance of both broadband and mobility service. I am proud that this commission has heeded this call and is formally adopting the principle advanced by the Joint Board last year in its recommended decision that universal service support should be directed where possible to networks that provide advanced services as well as voice services. Moreover, upon the advice and good counsel of our state members and colleagues, we are adopting a mobility fund to infuse $300 million in capital to extend 3G and 4G networks to more Americans in 2012. In addition, we are adopting a mobility fund to ensure that consumers have access to mobile broadband services by providing support to providers in hard-to-serve areas and eliminating our identical support rule. We owe a great gratitude to our state members. They have been a significant resource for this commission in our reform process. We sat through numerous workshops and meetings together, hashing out ideas and concepts. They spent countless hours drafting a proposal for our consideration, and they have been more than generous with their time and advice. I want to sincerely thank them for their good counsel in this proceeding and for their service to our nation. The FCC has heavily relied on the suggestions in their plan. We are requiring USF recipients to meet interim broadband build-out milestones, to annually report on their build-out and service requirements, and to file those reports jointly at the FCC and the state utility commissions. We also are implementing a cap on total per-line support and other fiscally responsible measures to eliminate waste and inefficiency in the system. In addition, we are clarifying in our order that we expect all carriers to negotiate in good faith in response to requests for IP-to-IP interconnection for the exchange of voice traffic. Not only did we hear from the states about how important it is to ensure that IP interconnection occurs, we also received significant comment from competitive voice providers that the lack of IP interconnection is impeding the development of IP networks, including VoIP services. As such, the order confirms that the duty to negotiate in good faith does not depend upon the network technology underlying the interconnection, whether it's TDM, IP, or otherwise, and that we expect good faith negotiations to result in interconnection arrangements between IP networks for the purpose of exchanging voice traffic. Another topic that I spent a great deal of time on with my state commission colleagues was the intercarrier compensation regime. Today's decision sets forth a national approach for ICC reform for both intrastate and interstate access rates. It's probably not surprising that I naturally gravitated to the proposal in our notice for proposed rulemaking that would have had the states reform their own intrastate access rates and left the interstate reform to this commission. But after much discussion and consideration, I will accept the chairman's proposal that a federal approach is the right outcome in this instance. A multi-state process for reform would be long and arduous, costly and demanding on the states, with unpredictable and perhaps inconsistent results. In the meantime, the pressure would continue to build for us to intervene and stabilize the ICC regime to provide the companies the predictability and certainty they need to continue to invest and innovate for the benefit of consumers. However, I think it's only appropriate that our actions today carefully preserve and recognize the reforms that some states already have undertaken. Most importantly, we have provided for replacement funding as intrastate access rates decline as a result of our reform, which relieves the financial burden that would have been on states in their own attempts at reform. To that end, we also have carefully balanced ICC revenue replacement for providers with the important goal of not burdening consumers with significant increases in their bills or overburdening the USF, which is ultimately paid for by consumers. As indicated by our staff's analysis, we believe that the overall benefits that will flow to consumers as a result of this reform will far outweigh the minimal price increases they may experience on their phone bills due to ICC reform. I also want to be clear that states will continue to have an important role with respect to the arbitration and interconnection agreements and the operation of USF. With respect to USF, states will continue to designate eligible telecommunications carriers for USF purposes and will continue to protect consumers through their carrier of last resort obligations. As technology evolves, so too must the role of regulators. We are experiencing a significant technological evolution as networks are transitioning to internet protocol and consumers are using multiple modes of communications, sometimes simultaneously. Indeed, the underlying cause of reforms we implement today is due to the enormous technological shift that has occurred over the last 10 years. One constant that I have seen, however, is that consumers expect their state regulators to serve and protect them. Moreover, those of us at the FCC need the state's expertise and knowledge on the ground to properly execute and operate our new universal funding mechanisms. For instance, we need the state's assistance in identifying those areas that are currently unserved by broadband. We want to target our limited resources to those consumers who do not have any broadband provider offering them service. Likewise, we will need the state's help assessing that those providers who receive funding meet their public interest obligations to build and serve. As such, I am confident that these reforms are an opportunity for us to continue working hand in hand with our state colleagues to ensure that broadband is available throughout the country, and I look forward to our continued partnership with the states in this important endeavor. The communications marketplace has changed dramatically, and one significant reason is the explosion of mobile services in the U.S. More and more Americans are relying upon their smartphones to access the internet, and almost 30% of Americans have cut their cord when it comes to home service. I have worked closely with my colleagues to ensure that we are providing significant support for mobile services, particularly in rural America. Certainly, rural consumers and those who travel in non-urban areas expect that they will have access to mobile services that are comparable to anywhere else in this nation. We want and expect our devices to work wherever we are. As such, I believe that a budget which reflects the growing importance of mobility to Americans is important, and that we should offer ongoing support for those areas that would not be served otherwise. I am grateful that the fund ongoing for mobility support, the Mobility Fund 2, has been increased 25% over what was originally proposed in the circulated draft, reflecting the fact that mobility for rural areas is a priority. I also want to thank the chairman for agreeing with me that while the identical support should be phased out, we need to ensure that Mobility Fund 2 is operating and funded before the phase down is completed for wireless CETCs. The pause in the phase down I proposed is now fully reflected so that wireless carriers can have some confidence that they won't lose more than 40% of funding before they know what support they may qualify for in Mobility Fund 2. While deployment of networks to reach individual consumers has been the paramount purpose of the High Cost Fund, it has also provided for service to community anchor institutions, including schools, libraries, healthcare facilities, and public safety agencies, in order to ensure that these vital institutions can obtain the modern services that are essential for service to their communities. We have provided them an opportunity to engage with USF recipients in the network planning stage. As such, their communications needs are fully considered by the providers. Similarly, recipients will detail in their annual reports to the FCC and the state commissions those community anchor institutions that have received service as a result of the fund. Accordingly, we will be able to account for all of the benefits that local communities receive as a result of USF support. Although the reforms we adopt today are extremely important for ensuring that basic and advanced communication services are physically available to all Americans, those services cannot be truly available if consumers cannot afford to purchase them, or if the devices they need to access them are not available, or if they cannot attain the skills they need to know how to use these services. I appreciate those who have called for us to address these consumer needs today, and I agree with you that we need to do more in this area. Our Broadband Adoption Task Force is working diligently to find solutions to these issues, and I fully expect that we will soon be addressing the proposal in our Lifeline proceeding to adopt pilot projects for broadband adoption to benefit low-income Americans who qualify for the Lifeline program. I look forward to our continued work with our task force, including finishing the Lifeline proceeding before the end of the year, so that we can make more headway on the significant issue for low-income consumers. To our bureaus and their staffs, I thank you for your tremendous and Herculean efforts throughout this proceeding. I know you have made many personal sacrifices to help us reach this moment, and I wish to commend you for the results. You planned and conducted workshops, reviewed our record, listened to the numerous interested parties in this proceeding, balanced all concerns, crafted the order and accompanying further notice, and yes, put up with our office. But please know how much we appreciate all of you. I wish I could say right now that we were at the finish line, but this indeed is a marathon. And for those of you who will compete in Sunday's race, sadly it will not be me. You have been preparing for months for this milestone that we've reached today. But we are at mile 20, just a little further to go. And I, for one, look forward to our continued engagement on the implementation of these reforms. I also want to join in the chorus in congratulating the chairman and my fellow commissioners on today's vote. The task before us has not been an easy one, but it is certainly one for which I am proud that this commission has finally achieved. Commissioner Copps and Commissioner McDowell, I know you have both witnessed past attempts at USF and ICC reform, and you must be deeply proud today. Thank you for your diligence and hard work. And once again, Mr. Chairman, I want to express my gratitude for your leadership, engagement, and willingness to listen and address my concerns, and for your honest attempt at reaching consensus. Lastly, I would like for you to give me the privilege of acknowledging the hard work of my wireline advisor, Angie Cronenberg. Your tireless commitment to our priorities and willingness to make incredible personal sacrifices served me and our team well. You and Louis Peretz, throughout this process, were able to capture and defend those principles that I hold dear in numerous meetings and exchanges. And I wish to sincerely thank you, Commissioner Copps, Margaret McCarthy, Sharon, Carol, Victoria, Rebecca, Zach. I couldn't say all women, so Zach, for all of, even though we know who's working, right? And for all of those captured in those slides, for your commitment to reform and for your willingness to serve this nation so nobly. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and this is an incredible day for all of us.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Clyburn. Today is indeed a momentous step in our efforts to harness the benefits of broadband for every American. I am tremendously grateful to each of my colleagues on the Commission for working hard, working together to get this done. The work of the staff has been just incredible, and I'll have more to say about those, and there are others to thank as well. But this is a once-in-a-generation overhaul of universal service, keeping faith with our nation's long commitment to connecting all Americans to communication services. We are taking a system designed for the Alexander Graham Bell era of rotary telephones and modernizing it for the era of Steve Jobs and the internet future he imagined. We are reaffirming for the digital age the fundamental American promise of opportunity for all. We are furthering our national goal of connecting the country to wired and wireless broadband, and we're helping put America on its proper 21st century footing, positioning us to lead the world in a fiercely competitive global digital economy. Infrastructure has always been a key pillar of American economic success, connecting consumers and businesses, facilitating commerce, and unleashing innovation. Broadband internet is the indispensable infrastructure of our 21st century economy. Recognizing this fact, for years, respected voices have called universal broadband an essential ingredient for American economic competitiveness and job creation. In its 2007 report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm, the National Academy of Sciences said that accelerating progress toward making broadband connectivity available and affordable for all is critical, and they urged government to take the necessary steps to meet that goal. In 2010, in our National Broadband Plan, we correctly called extending wired and wireless broadband to all Americans the great infrastructure challenge of the 21st century. And last year, IBM CEO Sam Palmisano expressed a view we've heard from other CEOs, from governors, from mayors, and from consumers across the country. He implored policymakers to fix the bridges, but don't forget broadband. And he said that a pervasive broadband infrastructure would be a powerful generator of new jobs and economic growth. Today, building on years of hard work by the FCC and on Capitol Hill and on stakeholders outside the agency, this commission is acting unanimously and on a bipartisan basis to meet this critical national challenge and bring the Universal Service Fund and intercarrier compensation into the broadband age. Our action will enable millions of Americans to work, learn, and innovate online. It will open new vistas of digital opportunity and enhance public safety. It will create jobs in the near term and lay the foundation for enduring job creation, economic growth, and U.S. global competitiveness for years to come. Today's reforms of the multi-billion-dollar Universal Service Fund and intercarrier compensation will bring real benefits to consumers and communities in every part of the country. Over the next year, the Connect America Fund will bring broadband to more than 600,000 Americans who wouldn't have it otherwise. In the 5 years after that, millions more rural families will be connected. And today's order puts us on the path to get broadband to every American by the end of the decade, to close the broadband deployment gap, which now stands at close to 20 million Americans. We're also extending the benefits of mobile broadband coverage to tens of thousands of unserved road miles, those areas where millions of Americans work, live, and travel, but that are areas of frustration and economic stagnation for so many people today, where mobile connections are needed but unavailable, where small businesses lose out on customers and productivity, where people in traffic accidents or other disasters can't reach 911. Today we make mobility an independent, universal service objective for the first time, providing dedicated support through the world's first ever mobility fund. And over the next 3 years, we'll provide almost $1 billion per year in funding for universal mobility. Mobile is one of the fastest growing and most promising sectors of our economy, and having the world's largest market for 3G and 4G subscribers will be a key competitive advantage, enabling us to lead the world in mobile innovation. New wired and wireless broadband will be a lifeline for rural communities currently being bypassed by the opportunities of the internet revolution. As a result of what we are doing today, young people who didn't see a future in their small hometowns will now be able to access a new world of opportunity. Entrepreneurs in small towns won't need to move to the big city to live their dreams. Instead, small business owners doing everything from selling beef to starting hunting lodges, like a resident I met in Liberty, Nebraska, wanted to do. Well, they'll be able to reach customers in the next town, the next city, the next state or country, and boost their markets, their efficiency, their productivity through cloud-based services. Today's action will empower small businesses that otherwise couldn't exist in small-town America and create new jobs in those communities. That includes farmers who need broadband to access commodity pricing, crop information, real-time weather reports, online auctions. During our process, we heard this directly from farmers in rural America. Today's action will help connect anchor institutions, which can play a vital role in expanding basic digital literacy training, so needed in a world where broadband skills are necessary both to find jobs and land jobs. Today's action has the potential to be one of the biggest job creators in rural America in decades. We estimate that the order as a whole will unleash billions of dollars in private sector broadband infrastructure spending in rural America over the next decade, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. And by empowering millions more Americans to engage in e-commerce as buyers and sellers, the order will grow the size of our overall online marketplace and provide a boost for Main Street businesses all over the country, including urban areas. Today's action will change the landscape for students who are now unserved by broadband, providing educational opportunity that would otherwise be denied in now unserved areas. It will change the landscape for seniors and people with illnesses, providing remote diagnostics and treatment to people who would otherwise have no access, who would have to travel for hundreds of miles. It will enable parents in now unserved areas to finally connect with their children in military service overseas through video chat or other modern communications means that require broadband. Each of these are examples of people we met in our proceeding over the last few months who talked about real needs that they have today. Now, by constraining the growth of the fund, today's reforms will also minimize the burdens these programs place on all consumers, keeping hundreds of millions of dollars in consumers' pockets over the next several years. Our overhaul of the intercarrier compensation system will gradually eliminate the billions of dollars in hidden subsidies currently paid by consumers across the country through their wireless and long-distance phone bills. Our staff estimates that the consumer benefits of ICC reform will be more than $2 billion annually. Consumers will get more value for their money and less waste. These material benefits flow directly from the policy, principles, and structural reforms that we've embraced in this order. The reforms implement the idea that government programs should be modernized to focus on the strategic challenges of today and tomorrow, not yesterday. Starting today, USF will be transformed into the Connect America Fund, which will directly take on our country's 21st century infrastructure challenge by enabling the private sector to build robust, scalable, affordable broadband to homes, businesses, and anchor institutions in unserved communities. Our ICC reforms will also advance the deployment of modern Internet protocol networks, and as the telephone network transitions to an IP network, the order affirms our expectation that carriers negotiate in good faith for IP-to-IP interconnection for voice traffic. Today's order also recognizes, as I mentioned, the growing importance of mobile broadband. For the first time, we make mobility an independent universal service objective and take significant concrete steps to meet that goal. Also a first, today's order brings market-based competitive bidding into universal service support. In a series of ways, including auctions, we have structured distribution of public funds to ensure real efficiency and accountability in both the Connect America Fund and the Mobility Fund. For the first time, our order puts the fund on a firm budget. Fiscal responsibility was a principle we announced on day one, and we've adhered to that in this order, protecting the interests of millions of consumers who contribute into the fund every month. And we put in place a series of reforms to eliminate duplicative and other funding where it's not needed and can't be justified. We also end arbitrage schemes that take advantage of gaps, closing loopholes in our rules. Now, faced with many complex and nuanced policy questions, I believe that this commission, all of us together, have reached the right solutions because we've approached the issues the right way. We didn't rubber stamp or adopt wholesale the proposals of any stakeholder or group of stakeholders, though we welcomed all proposals, all constructive engagement. Instead, we made our decisions on what's right for the American people and our economy based on facts and data gathered in one of the most extensive records in FCC history, including hearings and workshops all across the country, more than 2,700 substantive comments totaling more than 26,000 pages, all of which were reviewed carefully by this incredible team. We have focused on putting consumers first, calibrating the policies we adopt to maximize consumer benefit. We've been careful to ensure that affected companies face predictable and measured transition paths so that they can keep investing in their networks to better serve consumers and support our economy. And we have brought increased clarity to areas of uncertainty created by tensions between new communication services like VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol, and our old rules. Getting to this point wasn't easy. It required us all to make tough choices about what the Connect America Fund and consumers could and could not support. These started at a very high level. Some proposals would have required consumers to pay a greater share of the costs of reform or would have increased the size of the fund. That would have put too much of a burden on consumers during these difficult economic times. Some said that we should dramatically reduce the size of the fund. But that would have left behind the millions of Americans being bypassed by broadband and with no prospect of broadband connectivity, denying opportunity and economic access to those communities. Some would have had us operate as if we were writing on a blank slate, but of course we're not, and that would have risked needless consumer disruption, build-out delays, and other unintended and undesirable consequences. Now, getting to this point not only required tough choices, it required the engagement of many stakeholders around the country, of our partners in the federal government, the states, tribal communities, the private sector, the nonprofit community. I appreciate the broad level of constructive engagement. It made a difference in our result. That constructive engagement very much includes the many members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who have worked for years to reform and improve universal service and whose ongoing and constructive input is reflected in our action today. There are too many to thank individually in Congress, but I'm grateful to all of the members of Congress who provided input and guidance. The President has been a consistent leader on broadband and the opportunities of technology, and our actions today help meet national goals of universal access to wired and wireless broadband. I want to thank our state partners who pioneered many of the reforms we adopt today. Moving forward, I'm pleased that the states will continue to play a vital role in ensuring that consumers are well served by our Universal Service Program and in other ways. Now, very importantly, I'm deeply grateful to my fellow commissioners who have worked tremendously hard to make today possible. Commissioners Copps and McDowell have been fighting to fix these programs for years, and Commissioner Clyburn's strong experience at the state level in South Carolina has been invaluable in our efforts. From top to bottom, today's order reflects the seriousness of purpose and thoughtful input from each of my colleagues on the Commission. It is a better order as a result, and on behalf of the American people, I thank each of you. At a time when citizens want solutions, not gridlock, I'm proud that this Commission is approving bipartisan reform of a broken system that will deliver massive benefits to the American people. Now, of course, this would not have happened without the tremendous work of the expert staff of this agency. Without you, we would not be accomplishing today what's been elusive for many years, making reform a reality. Our staff, as all of my colleagues have acknowledged, have not only worked hard, they've performed brilliantly. Crunching numbers, mastering complex technologies, operating at a world-class policy level. Today's order is the product of that tremendous effort. I'm not the first person today to say this, but your work makes us proud. It fulfills the vision of the FCC as an expert agency serving our country. There are so many people to thank, as you saw from that list. Each of you sitting here, Sharon Gillette, Ruth Milkman, Carol Maddie, Carol and I, and Ruth, and Jim, and others here had our first conversations about universal service reform 20 years ago. Rebecca Goodhart, Jim Schlichting, Michael Steffen, so many others, Steve Rosenberg, so many others in our Wireline Bureau, our Wireless Bureau, our General Counsel's Office, our Strategic Planning Office, all over the Commission. I want to acknowledge the work of the team that worked on our National Broadband Plan. It includes many of the people here and also people who are no longer with the Commission for playing an important role in advancing the ball on these reforms in a significant way. The staff of each of the commissioners on the 8th floor deserve a tremendous amount of credit for mastering these incredibly complex topics, for ensuring a serious collaborative effort. I'd mentioned the fact that so many people from the 8th floor staff and the bureaus were here late last night, but that might leave people the impression that last night was the only night people were here late. The more important point is that I don't know anyone can remember the last night when you all weren't here late working on this, and we appreciate that so much, and you've produced a result that you will be proud of for many, many years. I want to particularly salute and applaud Zach Katz in my office, the quarterback of this effort. Zach, you've ran this process in a way that makes us all proud, that I think we've all seen how indispensable you are. Bringing all of this together simply would not have been possible without your work, and also the work of all the people who worked with you in the chairman's office to make this happen, as well as, again, the 8th floor and the staff of the bureaus. Your leadership, your persistence, your savvy, your calmness and strength under fire and in the foxhole, we all honor that and appreciate that very much. Now, the bad news to Zach and our team and everyone else is that our work is not yet done. We have implementation work ahead, and there will continue to be intensive engagement with all stakeholders in response to the further notice we'll adopt today and in the months to come. We still, of course, as my colleagues have mentioned, face a tremendous challenge in increasing broadband adoption, an ongoing barrier to opportunity in both rural and urban America. And while there's no silver bullet for broadband adoption, the lifeline portion of USF can be part of the solution, including a significant investment in broadband adoption pilot programs. I've asked the staff to gear up Lifeline reform for action this year. Those are not fake smiles on their faces. But wait, there's more. As my colleagues have also noted, there's work to do on the contribution side. That's another important USF topic the Commission will address. I will leave with a closing thought. In the 1930s and 1950s, when Presidents Roosevelt and Eisenhower directed federal funding to roads, tunnels, bridges in the national highway system, they were investing in the then current technologies to connect our people and our communities. The same was true for electricity. The same was true for telephone service. Key 20th century universal service achievements. All of those investments have paid tremendous dividends for our economy and our country. Today, broadband internet truly is the information superhighway, the key connective infrastructure of the 21st century. It's what will drive our competitiveness, our economy, and broad opportunity for decades to come. Our action today is firmly rooted in sound principles that have served our country well in the past, and I'm confident it will help deliver a bright future for all Americans. With that, let us proceed to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Approving in part, concurring in part.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. So ordered, and the request for editorial privileges is granted. And I am asked to make the following reminder, which under the rules, the sunshine period prohibition on ex parte context will remain in effect until the full text of our decision is released. Madam Secretary, please announce our next item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, last on your agenda today, the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau will provide an update on the status of preparations for the nationwide test of the emergency alert system.
Admiral Barnett, do not take this personally. Now that broadband is available to all, they are simply going to watch this online. But please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. May I say briefly, the Emergency Alert System has been around for many years, but I'm pleased to be here with my colleagues from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau to brief you on our preparations for the first ever nationwide test of the Emergency Alert System, or EAS, scheduled for November 9th, 2011 at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. At that time, the familiar EAS tones will interrupt regular programming on every television and radio channel across the U.S., whether broadcast, cable, or satellite, followed by the announcement that begins, "This is a test of the Emergency Alert System." This test will occur simultaneously across the United States and the U.S. territories and will last approximately 3 minutes, after which regular programming on all channels will resume. This test will involve only broadcast radio, television, cable television, satellite radio, and television and wireline video service providers. It will not involve landline or mobile telephone devices or other critical infrastructure such as power grids. Now, the purpose of the test is to allow the FCC, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the EAS community to assess how well the EAS would perform its primary function, that of alerting the entire public about a national emergency. If a national alert is ever issued, the FCC rules require that all EAS participants, and that is all the ones I mentioned, plus video service providers like Fios, Verizon's Fios, and AT&T UVerse, must interrupt their programming to provide the alert. All EAS participants must take part in this nationwide test and must submit the results to the FCC within 45 days of the test, which would be December 27th of this year. The test is diagnostic in nature to assess how well EAS equipment at the approximately 30,000 EAS participant facilities nationwide can receive and propagate a nationwide alert to the public in the event of a national emergency. So, on November 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern, FEMA will initiate the EAS code for national emergencies. The EAS code and alert will rebroadcast, cascading by broadcast stations and other EAS participants until it's been distributed through the entire U.S. And U.S. territories. There will be similarities with the periodic monthly EAS tests with which many consumers are familiar. However, there will be some differences, such as the test occurring on all stations at the same time and lasting a little longer than usual. In addition, due to technical limitations associated with the test use of an actual live code for national emergencies, which is necessary if we really want to test the actual system, the visual message accompanying the test may not indicate in all cases that the event is in fact a test. This is particularly true for consumers viewing the test over cable television. The FCC and FEMA have taken a number of steps to address this limitation. First, we have worked with EAS participants to develop technical solutions to address the issue. The National Association of Broadcasters has developed a slide that can be inserted onto the screen during the test that will let viewers know that this is a test. And we've suggested to the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, in conjunction with the major networks, that they air a brief message immediately before and after the test with open captioning, explaining that this is only a test, and many major networks have already agreed to do so. The FCC, along with FEMA and EAS participants, have engaged in an extensive outreach to people with disabilities and organizations that represent people with disabilities, as well as other consumer groups, to ensure that they understand that the alert on November 9th is in fact a test. Our Bureau and the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau has worked with various groups representing the deaf and hard of hearing. Last week, our Bureau and CGB and FEMA briefed representatives of those organizations about the test. And I would like to acknowledge and thank the Association for the Deaf and the Hearing Loss Association and others for their advice and assistance on this. In addition to the deaf and hard of hearing community, the FCC has taken steps to reach out to other consumer and community groups to inform them about the test. For months, we have communicated with over 100 consumer and community organizations, including those representing the elderly and those who do not speak English as a primary language. We developed a consumer fact sheet and guide and produced public service announcements for radio and television in both English and Spanish with captioning included. I've written the governor of each state, and we have contacted state emergency managers. The Public Safety Bureau, CGB, and FEMA have engaged in multiple outreach efforts directed at 911 call centers, state, tribal, and local governments, including providing webinars and briefings for government agencies. We provided information for newsletters and blogs for over 40 national organizations representing public safety and other governmental officials. And we prepared a step-by-step guide for EAS participants with instructions regarding exactly what to do on the day of the test. In addition, the Office of Legislative Affairs has reached out to members of Congress about the test, and even earlier this week I did an interview with TV Guide about the story that would run next week's issue talking about the test. The FCC just launched a database through which EAS participants may submit their test results electronically. Our Bureau has hosted meetings with organizations representing EAS participants and has participated in numerous roundtables and webinars hosted by FEMA, NAB, the National Alliance of State Broadcasting Associations, PBS, and others to educate EAS participants about the test, and we'll continue to do these efforts right up to and including the test. I would like to thank the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and especially Joel Gurin, Karen Pelt-Strauss, and Greg Leibach, the MEDO Bureau, International Bureau, Enforcement Bureau, as well as the Office of General Counsel, the Managing Director, Media Relations, and Legislative Affairs for all of their assistance in preparing for this test. And we look forward to getting the results from November 9th in order to make our EAS system better.
Thank you, Admiral Burnett. Do any of my colleagues have any comments? Go ahead,
Just
please.
real quickly, thanks to the Bureau, your FEMA, your agency partners, and a whole whole wealth of stakeholders. I don't think there's any substitute for a good test. I think this is shaping up to be a really good test. I would just particularly commend you on the breadth and depth of outreach that you did. Kind of builds a little bit on the experience we had in DTV, and I think it sets a good precedent for other activities in this commission. So we look forward to a great test on November 9th and taking the lessons learned to make a stronger and more robust EAS.
Thank you. Commissioner
Just real quick, I understand a number of broadcasters and other interested parties have invited FCC staff to actually come physically to observe some of this test. So I would hope we would be able to do that as much as the budget allows us to actually have hands-on, on-site observations, because I think we would all learn a lot if we're there in person. Thanks.
Agreed. Commissioner Clyburn?
Yes, Admiral, I'm looking forward to the engagement. I was flipping channels. I think might have been watching public television. That's my story. And and I saw this familiar face. Yeah, I know, you know. So it's already started. But so no, seriously, I want to thank you for the time and energy, and also, you know, recognizing some of the limitations and working through them, especially with those, you know, with sight impairment. So again, I'm looking forward to tuning in on November 9th, and appreciate all of your support in updating us on the progress.
Thank you. And this, it is an important test, part of a larger series of efforts on our part here at the FCC, together with our partners at FEMA, elsewhere in the federal government and states, to make sure that our emergency communications systems meet the needs of the public, especially as communications change. So our work on the National Public Safety Network for mobile broadband, very important. The launch of PLAN later this year, which will allow government officials in emergencies to send alerts directly to mobile phones. New York City by the end of this year, April for the rest of the country. Work on location accuracy for mobile 911, the tremendous work on next generation 911. There's really a lot to do here, and we acknowledge and thank you and your team for working so hard on these issues. We're all very much engaged with you because of the importance of this. This particular test is indeed important. It comes out of good work that you and the Bureau did. I'd like to thank and acknowledge all of the efforts by your part, FEMA, broadcasters and cable operators, to provide awareness and outreach. I do want to thank the many cable networks that have agreed to run public service announcements before and after the nationwide EAS test to clarify that it's only a test, because we understand that in some areas the technology may not be there to insert that when the test is run. That alone is already a good outcome from the test, that we have discovered that. And I appreciate the cable industry working with all of us to address these issues for the future. So thank you, and we look forward to the learnings from this test. Now, do any of my colleagues have any announcements today?
I do, not to cast a cloud of gloom over the otherwise celebratory mood that pervades the room. I must today announce that Margaret McCarthy will be leaving my office soon to return to Capitol Hill, where she will continue her exemplary public service career in the office of our friend Senator Amy Klobuchar. Senator Klobuchar's gain is my loss, and indeed the entire commission's. Margaret has brought a wealth of skill and creativity and smarts and total candor and good humor to everything she has done in my office. Her work on the Universal Service and Intercarrier Compensation item that we voted a few moments ago should go down in Commission annals as a best practices manual for all incoming 8th floor advisors. She mastered, and I mean really mastered, all of the issues and implications of an unbelievably complex set of issues, developed expert and innovative ways to improve the items, and spoke, as I said, with total and refreshing candor to all parties concerned. She represented our office exactly the way I wanted it to be represented. I'd like to think that if I were staying on, Margaret would too. I hope she doesn't think I've abandoned her, but I know Senator Klobuchar and Margaret's new Capitol Hill colleagues will take very good care of her. So my thanks to her for everything she has done and just for being who she is. It's been a delight working with her. She remains a member of the extended COPS family, which is actually getting to be pretty good size now. And I look forward to her friendship and counsel in the months and years ahead, and everyone in my office joins me in wishing Margaret all good things as she continues developing what is obviously going to be a stellar career in public service.
Thank you. Nothing, Commissioner Clyburn?
I would like to join in a chorus in wishing Margaret well. We actually thought she, the last few days, we thought she was a member of our staff, but, you know. But since, you know, seriously, I want to thank you for that energy and intelligence and the exchange and the willingness to be partners in progress. We will miss you, but we know that you will not be far, and that we'll call on you probably more often than you want. But no, this is all out of love and our selfishness for it. Anyway, thank you so much, and all the best to you.
Hey.
Mr. Chairman, so I was taking it all in. I'm sorry, Margaret, out of order here. We're going to miss you tremendously in the McDowell office. It's been a true pleasure to work with you, and you fight for what you believe in, and you compromise on what you think you can compromise on, and when we can agree, it's an absolute pleasure, but it's an absolute pleasure regardless. So you've been a tremendous asset to the Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The feeling is unanimous. We're all going to miss you a lot. It is a gain for Senator Klobuchar. You will always have a place back here at the FCC, particularly if you keep a positive eye on our budget and we have the headcount available. So we're counting on you, and we wish you well. With that, Madam Secretary, can you please announce the date of the next FCC meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission will be Wednesday, November 30th, 2011.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned. All right.
Congratulations.
I'll let Neil call on people.
That's the rule. We have new faces today, so we're going to identify yourself and the name of the organization before you ask your question. We're going to start on the left of Paul.
Good. Actually, I wanted to mention one thing which I meant to say during the Media Bureau items, which is that we plan on moving to decisions on those sometime in the spring.
Chairman, Paul Barbagallo, BNA. On the issue of contributions, do you expect any slowdown given the election year we're heading into?
I think you're asking when we're going to do contributions reform?
Yeah, is there a
and we
plan
haven't
in
announced
place?
a schedule yet. We recognize that that's an important part of the puzzle, but as you can see, we've had a team that's been working around the clock on this for quite some time, and we haven't set a schedule or agenda for the timing for contributions.
Thanks, Ted.
Hi, Ted Gotch with Telecommunications Reports. There's been a lot of speculation, obviously even before you all made your decision here, that there was going to be some litigation based on this. In the last few days, there's been a lot of pushback from RLEC's rural incumbents, specifically saying that what they were hearing was going to be included was not giving them the kind of support they needed to transition, with the changes being made. And I wondered if that was something that, that was weighed carefully by you all, maybe more than something else, than other aspects at the end, and if that's something you all are worried about going forward.
Well, as I think all the commissioners talked about today, we had a series of tough choices in a complicated area to make today. Our collective focus was on transforming this old program to broadband, making sure that it met its goal of getting broadband to unserved Americans, and to do it in a way that recognized the legitimate needs of existing players, and so you've heard all of us talk about the importance of transition paths and not having flash cuts. I think we're all confident that we've made the right set of choices on a series of difficult questions, and that our goals will be achieved as the program rolls out.
Thanks, Jasmine.
What is your response to complaints that the USF reforms could raise consumers' local phone bills with things like the access recovery charges and subscriber line charges?
Well, I don't expect that overall consumer rates will go up as a result of this order as compared to not doing reform. So the reform, what we're doing today, eliminates hidden subsidies that ends up on consumer phone bills. It constrains the growth of the fund, and that growth would have translated directly into increases on consumer phone bills. And of course, overall, the reforms today will deliver massive benefits to consumers all over the country by getting broadband to millions of unserved Americans, boosting small businesses, particularly in rural America, but all over the country. And all the other benefits that we talked about today. So we think it's not a close call. The consumer benefits from the reforms today are massive, very significant.
Thanks,
Deanne Divis with Inside GNSS. I noted in the summary that the Remote Areas Fund includes a provision for wireless and unlicensed unlicensed wireless services. Could you please address how the reform would relate to Light Squared? Specifically, would they be able to provide services as an unlicensed wireless service provider, and when would they be eligible for funding under the Mobility Fund?
Well, on the unlicensed piece, I'll have to get back to you because I'm not certain how to answer the question about what the item does with respect to unlicensed. So we'll get back to you on that. I apologize.
And on when they're not licensed yet for broadband, mobile broadband, when would they be available? When would the funds be available for them?
Well, I'm going to let the staff people kind of go through the specific timing on the mobility fund. The key points on the mobility fund are that for the first time, the Commission, our country, is recognizing mobility as a universal service goal, and is looking not just, and what does that mean? It means looking not just at connectivity in the home, but recognizing that if when you travel between home and work, you lose mobile coverage, that's an issue. If you have an accident on the road and you don't have mobile coverage, that's an issue. If you're at the mine in West Virginia that had that terrible tragedy last year, that mine was in a place where there was no mobile coverage. So mobility for the first time is being recognized as an objective of the program, and as you heard, out of the savings of the program that we're generating, we will be creating a targeted mobility fund to meet these objectives.
Bill?
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Wondering if you can take us through your thoughts that led you to increase the broadband speed standards to 6, 1.5 before deploying your cost model. And as a second tier to that, what happens if your cost models come back and you find out that 6, 1.5 is too expensive?
Well, obviously we made all these decisions based on a lot of data, a lot of facts, a lot of work that's been done inside and outside the Commission. We did think in, planning for universal service, not just for the next year, but for years beyond that, we needed to find a way to embrace robust and scalable broadband. And so the numbers that we put in there are our best judgment on what are sensible target numbers to hit. They're based on a lot of cost-related work that's been done. The final cost model has to come out of a transparent notice and comment process. We expect that to be in the range of what we've laid out today.
Hello, Jonathan Make at ComDaily. Given that you just now talked about being committed to moving on the successor to Form 355 and the public file, putting them online. Can you talk about some of your other near-term media priorities, things that you expect the commission to complete? Thanks.
I think the first thing I want everyone to do who worked on this is to take some time off. But we continue to focus on, obviously there's implementation work to do on this. Broadband adoption, which we've been talking a lot about in the past weeks, continues to be important. We'll continue to pursue job creation initiatives every day. Obviously, there are spectrum issues ahead of us. There are public safety issues ahead of us. We still have a lot of work to do.
Hi, Kim Hart with Politico. The Lifeline and Link Up programs were also mentioned by a couple of the commissioners as a next important step to USF reform. Do you have any idea of when that might be taken up?
Well, I mentioned today that I've asked the Bureau to gear it up for action this calendar year. So that's our goal. It's a very similar team to the one that's working on this, and we have to work within the resources that we have. But as you've seen, we haven't been waiting on that to tackle adoption. We've had announcements in the past few weeks on adoption that are very significant, that are moving the needle. And it's also important to understand that Lifeline will be part of the solution on broadband adoption. It won't and can't be the whole solution. And what we're looking at as part of a reform of the Lifeline program is investing in broadband pilot projects to develop ways to determine the most effective ways to close the gap on broadband adoption by using that program.
Hi, Gautam Nagesh, The Hill. There was a lot of talk today about anticipating on the part of the Commission the future communication needs of the American consumers. Given that, wouldn't it make sense for wireless or mobile to constitute a larger proportion of the USF endeavor?
Well, I think what we've done today on mobile is very significant, both in our country's history and also compared to what other countries are doing in identifying the importance of mobility as a universal service goal. The amount of funds that we're putting into that are very significant, and we think we have both found a way to dramatically improve or bring us closer to our goals on universal mobility, while also moving forward on the goals of getting basic broadband connectivity, wired or wireless, to people who are unserved in rural America. We took seriously the constraints that we imposed on ourselves of fiscal responsibility. One can make an argument for putting more money into a lot of different programs, but we were committed to funding this transition to universal broadband, to the Connect America Fund, to the Mobility Fund, out of the existing program and the current budget.
As this becomes the federal government's biggest broadband fund or effort ever, how would you assess the success of other federal programs, and do you believe that this needs to be, that this could be a multi-agency effort to fund projects like this, or should it lie in one place?
Well, this is for many, many years, we've been committed as a country to universal access to essential services like electricity, like telephone service. And this fund has helped, as you heard some of the commissioners say today, bring telephone service up to essentially universal rates in the United States. And that's good, but of course, the today and tomorrow's communications infrastructure isn't old analog circuit switch telephone service, but modern broadband internet. So transforming this program to broadband makes complete sense. We are doing it in a way that learns lessons from the past, because as we all agreed here, USF over time met its goals, but also developed its own reasons for reform. And in today's order, we have tackled each of the areas that have been identified as areas where reform is needed to ensure accountability and efficiency under the program. So, for example, for the first time, we're bringing competitive bidding into the program. We're eliminating the programs that provide for duplicative support. So we've tried very hard as a commission to learn the lessons from the past and make sure this program is accountable and efficient. And we've put in place ongoing efforts to make sure that the program remains that way.
I'm sorry, but the multi-agency, do you think it should remain, these broadband efforts should remain multi-agency or at one place?
Well, we're focused on the Universal Service Fund, the funds that we administer.
Thanks, Amy.
Amy Schatz with the Wall Street Journal. I just wanted to see if you think the FCC is on its timetable for the 180-day timetable on AT&T T-Mobile.
Well, as you know, I won't comment on specific pending transactions, and when we have something to announce on timing, we will let you know.
Is this something the agency is looking at now more, now that USF is over?
Same thing. I won't comment on specific pending transactions. And
Todd.
Asked and not answered. I'll pass.
Sorry, Amy.
Thanks.
Nothing else.
Works.
Brooks Bolick, Politico. I don't want to violate the one question rule, but I've got one question on 2 items. Does that count? The first question is on the broadcast file item. When you say you're going to be ready to have something by spring, does that include the program, the stuff that was in the NOI?
Our goal, we've set a goal of taking action on those items in the spring.
Okay, so that would just usually it goes NOI, NPRM, report and order. So you're kind of going to go NOI, report and order.
Let me, I think the commitment I've made is that we'll take action on those items by the spring, and we'll have to work with all of our colleagues to determine what that action is.
And could you sort of explain a
That's
little
three
bit
first,
more? I appreciate that. Could you explain a little bit more about your decision on VoIP, since it seems like that's really the way a lot of the broadband telephony is going?
Yeah, look, part of what the order recognizes is that VoIP communications has to be part of the systems going forward. One of the things the order does today is provide clarity around the role that VoIP plays, making it clear that as long as there is intercarrier comp, clearing up some of the confusion about whether VoIP calls should get compensated under that. So I think one of the many benefits of the order we adopted today is that by clearing up this uncertainty, we've removed a disincentive on some companies to move toward VoIP and other digital IP networks.
Great, thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll now proceed to Phase 2 of the post-agenda press conference on the Bureau items. The first will be the Media Bureau items, so Bill Lake and his team from Media Bureau. Once again, please identify yourself so that the people up here know who is asking the question. Thank you. Who would like to go first? Oh, are there questions on the Media Bureau item? Jonathan.
Go ahead, John. Look at Brooks being courteous on the subject.
I do want to say for the record that Brooks Bullock has been very gallant today in general. Hi, Jonathan.
Don't tell his bosses, though. It'll affect his bonus.
Jonathan Make it Com Daily. Just a couple, as usual, housekeeping items on the item. Can you go through again what the FNPRM recommends be put online and not be put online? There is something about emails and letters, for instance, that are recommended to be excluded, and then also something about disclosure of sponsorship identification. Thank you.
Yes, the general thrust of the item is to take the existing public file and put it online. We have proposed to exclude letters and emails out of privacy concerns. In particular, for example, if a child wrote to a station, there are legal limitations on putting children's letters online. So we think that that's something that we can leave in a correspondence file at the station. We've also proposed to include 2 things that are not in the public file today. One is sponsorship IDs, which are now required to be disclosed on the air. They go by at the end of a program typically. We think that it would be helpful to have those in a more permanent form included in the online file. And the other is shared services agreements between stations which are not currently required to be disclosed, but we've proposed to have those also included in the file.
And the SSA and the like agreements, those that would be they're now in the public file itself, it's just be that they would be in the online public file?
No, the shared services agreements are not in the public file today.
And this would be any such agreement, whether it's an LMA or what have you? Or only specific to, only proposed specific to SSAs?
We've specifically proposed shared services agreements, where obviously this is an NPRM, so we could have, comments on whether other types of agreements that are not currently disclosed ought also to be included.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Brooks?
On the issues list, or whatever is going to replace the issues list, I guess that's in NOI, correct? Do you expect to have something on that in the spring?
That is in an NOI that's been circulated. It hasn't been voted out yet. I won't add anything to what the chairman said as to his commitment to try to have that voted out in the spring. We live to serve.
Smart man.
Okay, anything else on the Media Bureau item? All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we'll now turn to the USF ICC item. I guess Sharon Gillette and Rick Kaplan will be taking the lead and their team. Who would like to start? Questions?
Yeah.
Ted, go ahead.
Hi, Ted Gotch with Telecommunications Reports. In recent days, a lot of the rural carriers had sort of been making it clear that they needed, they thought they needed some additional time and were looking for some sort of waiver provision for the before the first step of CAF reform would be taken. I guess pushing it back possibly 6 months. Is that and I believe Commissioner Clyburn made reference to waiver language being included in there, but never said how long it was for or when it would, push it back to implementation. Wondered if someone could help me out with that.
I think we're trying to figure out your question. I think I'm understanding you to ask about what is the waiver process that's in the order. Correct. I'm going to let Carol Maddie answer that. Okay.
The order sets out a process for any company that is contesting reductions in support and lays out the factors that they would need to provide to us. Another important point is most of the reforms that would impact the smaller rate of return companies will go in effect July 1st, not January 1st. So that already gives them a 6-month lead time, which I think is part of your question.
Any other questions?
That was July 1st, you said. Thank you.
Okay, Todd?
What's going on with the access recovery charge? I hear might be $250 a month. I hear all these figures. Now, how much can they charge? Who can charge it? Is it in addition to the so-called SLIC, or does it replace it? I think that's kind of the big bundle of questions.
Got it. Okay, so clarity around the access recovery charge. First of all, it is separate from any existing SLIC. They're not related to each other.
Okay.
Okay. Second is that it is limited. First of all, as Commissioner Copps mentioned, that there's a limit protection. Any consumer whose local phone bill, that's their landline phone bill, in other words, with the fees is already $30. Mm-hmm. There's no ARC charged. Any ARC increase cannot apply to those consumers. Secondly, the ARC increase is capped at, this is we would say it's the maximum theoretical ARC increase. Mm-hmm. 50 cents a year times 5 years for price cap carriers times 6 years for rate of return carriers. However, a carrier can only charge that much if they actually lose that much in access revenues, and most don't.
So it's 50 cents per month over the course of the
in
year?
other words, each year it would be 50 cents. The ARC could be charged as 50 cents. The next year it could be $1.
And
So it couldn't go up more than 50 cents.
And it's a monthly charge.
So it's a monthly charge.
So
So at the end of 5 years, it could go to $250. However, most consumers will not pay that because most carriers do not lose that much in revenue. And what we estimate is that In fact, on average, it'll be 10 to 15 cents a month, meaning that over the course of an entire year, it's the price of a cup of coffee.
So it's meant to recover their loss from reduced intercarrier compensation charges.
Exactly. And it's not divorced from that. So if they don't have a loss from reduced intercarrier, they can't charge it.
They need to demonstrate a loss to
That's
state
right.
regulators or to you guys.
Both.
Let me just say, that's one of the major differences from the ABC plan and some other proposals. The idea that the access recovery charge would be limited to the access shift or the intercarrier shift for each carrier is a major difference between what the Commission adopted today and what some stakeholders have suggested.
Okay. And then on a related kind of thing, Chairman Janikowski mentioned $2 billion in savings to consumers as a result of this. Well, properly said, isn't that $2 billion in savings and charges to companies, and is there a mechanism to require companies to pass that on to consumers, or do we rely upon the magic hand of the marketplace?
The analysis that our staff economists did that resulted in an estimate of $2.2 billion per year in consumer benefit as a result of reform assumed that some portion of the benefits that will accrue to long-distance carriers, wireless carriers, flows through, but not all of it. And we think that that's consistent with what past intercarrier comp reforms that the Commission has done have produced.
So if some portion flows through, then that $2.2 billion to consumers, there's a larger amount out there that's a benefit. There's a larger amount out there that the companies benefit that they're retaining. How much is that? What's the portion that we're talking about here that results in a 2.2?
I don't have it at my fingertips.
Is it most or some, or do you know if it's?
It's based on our economists' understanding of the current market structure. So it's a reasonable assumption based on what we observe.
But is the assumption that the companies will pass on a third, a half, most of the savings?
It's some substantial amount. I don't know the number.
Okay.
Can I ask a relation?
Satellite and unlicensed wireless services would be eligible for money under the Remote Areas Fund. I'm particularly interested in Light Squared, which currently provides service with a satellite, but is applied but not licensed for broadband. Are they eligible for money now under the Remote Areas Fund?
The only entities that can receive money under the Connect America Fund are eligible telecommunications carriers. So those are entities that have been designated typically by a state commission as eligible telecommunications carriers. Those companies could be using any technology, satellite, wireless, wireline, cable, but without that designation, they're not eligible. It's a statutory requirement.
And what about the Mobility Fund? When will that be available for folks who want to build broadband systems? What's the timing?
Mobility Fund Phase 1, we're targeting to try to have an auction in third quarter of next year with funds flowing in 2013. And then for Mobility Fund Phase 2, roughly a year following.
Coming back to the remote, is that same timing on the Remote Areas Fund? Or is that something, Mr. Katz is nodding yes?
It's
earlier?
Yeah, generally, since that's part of a further notice of proposed rulemaking, while the Phase 1 of Mobility Fund order was targeted for 2012 and 2013. With regard to the Remote Area Fund, I think it depends in part on what the Commission actually adopts in an order as a final distribution mechanism. There's a possibility that there may be money flowing in that by the end of 2012 or possibly in 2013.
And that's a future ruling, future order that you're talking about just now? A future something?
Yeah, the Remote Areas Fund, we'd have to bring home a report and order. That's part of the further notice of proposed rulemaking.
All right, let's move. Just add one thing. On the Remote Areas Fund, as well as some of these other mechanisms, there's a framework now in place, including a budget. So those mechanisms have been created. The details of the particular distribution elements are what Jim was talking about. That'll be addressed in the further notice.
Go ahead, Amy.
On Todd's question, I think when talked about a couple weeks ago when he announced that he was going to be doing this. He said that the savings would be $1 billion, and then today he was talking more about it being $2 billion. I just wonder how it went up $1 billion in 3 weeks.
Yeah, the $1 billion was wireless only, and when you add in landline long-distance savings, it comes to 2.2.
So if that's some kind of economic analysis that the FCC did, can you release that analysis?
Yeah. I think we'll follow up on that with the team after this.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, who hadn't asked a question? Kim?
I just want to add one quick follow-up on the excess recovery charge. After the 5 or 6 years that it can be increased by the price cap and rate of return carriers, will it then sunset, or will that be an indefinite charge that can stay?
So first of all, the amounts of excess recovery are declining over time, so the charge is declining.
Okay.
So that's a yes, and we see comment, right? We see comment on sunsetting it more rapidly than that.
Okay, Argo?
Yes. Can you explain a little bit about the right of the incumbent carriers to refuse? It said that my understanding from the summary was that if all of the carriers refuse within a given state, then it would be opened up. Can you explain under what circumstances alternative providers would in fact be able to compete?
The way we have set this up is with a state-level commitment, but state-level means for a given carrier for their territory within a given state. So if there were 2 incumbent local exchange carriers in a state, and each of them had a separate territory in the state, which is normally what it would look like, then if one of them refused, that whole amount of their territory would be up for competitive bidding. If both of them refused, all of that territory would be up for competitive bidding.
All right, Bill, you have a question?
Yeah, did you adopt Cable's request for a waiver as regards the access charges that AT&T was so animated about last week? And why?
We do make sure that the VoIP payments are equal and symmetric, so regardless if it's from a cable company or an ILEC, we make it technology neutral. Yes.
I don't think there's any waiver, though.
I didn't hear you.
There's not a waiver. We're adopting for the first time sort of the obligations for VoIP traffic, so in so doing, we make clear it's technology neutral. And so all carriers would be treated equally.
But you understand the thrust of AT&T's objection that in other words, that they'll be billing at the same rates for services that they're not actually providing. How do you respond to that?
They are providing the services, and we have mechanisms in order to ensure there's no double billing or the concerns that AT&T has raised.
Hey, Paul, you had a question?
Hi. Yeah, I just have a question regarding the legal justification for moving to bill and keep. Hi, Mr. Slick. I was hoping you could walk us through briefly the legal justification for moving to bill and keep, because as you know, the courts have consistently held that the FCC lacks jurisdiction over intrastate rates, but technically speaking, bill and keep is a rate methodology, which the agency's authority is a lot clearer. But granted, there will be this transition in between moving from the rates now to a rate methodology. So I was just wondering if you could walk us through the legal argument there.
The formerly strict division between intrastate and interstate rates was broken down, the Supreme Court has held, in 1996. The 1996 Telecommunications Act established what the Supreme Court has called a unique system of shared jurisdiction between the states and the federal government with respect to rates, and that's sections 251 and 252 of the Act. The 251b5 of the Act provides a mechanism for recovery of the costs of transport and termination, and B5 recognizes the methodologies which could include and do include bill and keep. So bill and keep is a permissible methodology which can be established at the federal level and implemented in partnership by the federal government, the FCC, and state commissions.
I guess in terms of the interim, is the argument that the ultimate destination is bill and keep, and that is that is a rate methodology. So what we do to get there is maybe in some gray areas, but ultimately we're moving to zero. So and FCC is on firm ground there. Is that fair to say?
The Commission's authority to establish rate methodology under B5 includes the authority to establish a path to that methodology.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, I think everyone's had a question. Is there any last one? And then we're going to, Mark Wigfield will be available for any other follow-up questions you all have. Feel free to go to Mark and we'll get answers to you. Bill, you had indicated for the last question.
Yeah, I'd like to know when the notion of six down, 1.5 up at the end as your target came through this. If you can walk us through this and basically tell us what you were thinking and why you think you can pull it off.
Yeah. So the order will require that recipients of Connect America Fund support.
I'm sorry, Zach, do you mind leaning forward just a bit? Thank you.
The order will require that recipients of Connect America Fund support provide from the outset 4 megabit down, 1 megabit up, and it will seek to maximize the number of those locations over the next 5 years that would get at least 6 down, 1.5 up, with the recognition that some locations, and possibly many, would expect to see higher speeds than that.
When did you come up with that?
So
at what point in this process did this enter into your thinking? And how did you suss that out?
Yeah. We don't normally answer questions.
We don't get into
about
the process.
Our internal process. Yeah.
We have a final product, and that's our answer. All right. All right.
I hope will be easy, but you never know.
Okay, this will be the last question.
What's the authority you guys use on the VoIP section? I mean, there's some confusion over that, at least for me.
You're talking about intercarrier?
Yeah. Counselor?
Yeah, Watson, do you want to
take it?
Sure.
Close it out for us?
Sure. The Commission, as you know, hasn't classified VoIP services, and if those services are telecommunications services, then it's no different than traditional POTS telephony. If those services are information services, then the Commission's authority derives from the same provisions, and the establishment of the rules is necessary to accomplish the principles and the requirements of the statute in the same way that it is for telephony services, for traditional telephony services.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to wrap the press conference up. If anybody has any further questions, Mark Wigfield will be available to field them, and we'll get answers for you. So thank you, everyone, for participating, and this concludes the press conference, and this concludes today's agenda meeting. Thank you.